Chapter 309 Death is Not the End Part 2. The arrival of Conrad's group didn't kindle any reaction within the tribe, whose members formed a succession of circles around the center where 16 poles stood erect with men tied on them. As fire rose from the bottom of the pole to the base of those men's feet, the smell of charred flesh mixed with that of blazing smoke, stretching throughout the encampment while screams echoing the victims' dread thundered. Clearly, they weren't the first round. Witnessing this scene, Else shook her head. The practice of human sacrifice yields no benefit for non-infernal cult members. Those tribal fools have no idea that the entirety of their sacrificial offerings only serves to fuel the infernal cult's merit reserves. You'd think that after 100,000 years of nothing, they'd get the hint. Else remarked as they approached the gathering. Though it was only a medium tribe, the Aaron tribe still numbered several thousand individuals. And right now, all gathered in one spot. In truth, men do not pray and make offerings to have their prayers answered. They do it to reaffirm their faith, ease their hearts, and maintain control over the faithful. Being answered is just a bonus. Zamira replied, her words eliciting an approving nod from Conrad. Lord Anzu, battle god, we, your humble servants, offer you these sacrifices so that you may protect us in battle and bring your infernal ire unto our enemies. The shaman conducting the ceremony exclaimed with his arms outstretched. The chieftain stood at his right while the thousands of tribesmen and tribeswomen at their back bowed in veneration toward a towering idol of the demon god and primogen Anzu. While deeper into the barbarian continent, the Four Kings faith was the most prominent. Within the border tribes the situation wildly differed. Due to their constant infighting, the border tribes mainly venerated the battle god, Anzu. In the past, Zamira's tribe was no exception. The fire burned brighter, lacing the feet of the sacrificial offerings and spreading to their legs. Warg. Their howls rose to a new pitch. With their eyes focused on prayer and sacrifice, no one noticed the small group sneaking into the sea of individuals. However, hum. When the loud throat-clearing echoed, all were forced to shift their heads. Making noise during a sacrifice was an offense no tribal faithful would ever violate. Therefore, all were startled by the sound they heard, and the shaman included, locked their eyes onto Conrad's party. And with but a glance, they could see they dealt with outsiders. Be it clothing or complexion, Conrad's lot really didn't seem to belong to the barbarian continent. And although the chieftain could discern no cultivation from them, as a transcendent night expert, his eyes shone with vigilance. Moreover, in usual days, the guards would first report the appearance of foreigners and the treasures they brought before letting them in. But now, they were nowhere to be seen. On the contrary, this tiny but undisturbed group stood alone in a foreign sea of thousands. Weighing those facts, the chieftain couldn't help but feel the situation reeking of foul play and danger looming in. However, when the shaman's eyes swept the party, they shone with dazzling light. The Lord is merciful, the Lord is merciful, and delivered new, fresh, and beautiful souls to accompany him in his battle hall. He proclaimed in a solemn, impassioned tone. This was naturally a load of horseshit even he didn't believe, but in that instant, he couldn't think of anything else. This shaman was a man of unique tastes, enjoying both men and women at the same rate. Therefore, when his eyes brushed the group, he felt as if heaven dropped a diamond mine beneath his nose. Sacrifice was only an excuse. He only wished to make use of the tribe's forces to capture them at a rapid pace. But when those words echoed, the chieftain almost spurted blood. When the situation was not even clarified, and the new party's strength assessed, how dared he make such a bold declaration? Clearly, this vile shaman was attempting to pit him out of his life. Conrad beamed. Indeed, the Lord is merciful and delivered new, fresh though not so beautiful souls to accompany him in his battle hall. The Lord being me, of course. Conrad chortled, triggering wild outrage within the more than 3,000 tribal folks whose acute hearing lost nothing of his brash words. Blasphemy! Blasphemy! Before his lordship, kill. Conrad cut before the shaman could finish his words. and instantaneously, wind gusts spread throughout the atmosphere to gently brush the faces of the more than 3,000 tribal folks. Slash. The tearing sound of a plethora of gashed throats echoed. But long before it did, the tribal folks could see blood gushing from their necks, yet not feeling anything occurring to their bodies. Their brains then registered their deaths, and they limply dropped on the ground. The earth was soon drenched in a blood river, formed by copious liters of blood. Conrad stepped forward, stopping before the burning poles whose victims had fallen to the same fate, and sat cross-legged. With a wave of his hand, he summoned the bodies of the guardsmen from his special ring and threw them into the mix, then activated the blossoming death art. Conrad's blossoming death art had reached the peak of the second layer and approached the third. However, due to insufficient comprehension, he had yet to break through. Although the blossoming death art wasn't an inherently offensive art, the third layer would open a new door with a vaster array of abilities, while the fourth was the minimum requirement to Conrad's grand aspiration. Therefore, he craved a breakthrough. Of course, those things couldn't be rushed. But as he connected himself to the thousands of deceased souls, fueled in their death and siphoned its essence, new mysteries of fatality appeared within Conrad's mind. The dark mist billowed into the sky before diving past Conrad's pore and fuel him with a deeper reserve of death essence and deceased souls. Of course, when compared to the more than 60 million already inhabiting him, it was but a drop in the bucket. As a cultivator, Conrad had no problem suppressing those souls. But as a mortal, though his comprehension of the art allowed him to keep them in a dormant stage and in check, he could feel them slowly clashing against him, feel the silent roars of indignation and the call for release. But release he would not, at least not now. His closed eyes opened, and he stretched out his hands, causing black fog to erupt from his sleeves and embrace the thousands of corpses. Lifted by the Chthonian force, they flew into the sky, and then a shocking scene occurred. The more than 3,000 human bodies slammed into one another, but instead of bursting into a rain of flesh, blood, and gore, they merged into an organic whole, becoming a 30 meters long and wide ball of human flesh. Chapter 310 Eldritch Prototype. Conrad's hands flashed in incantation gestures, causing human flesh ball to expand, morph, twist, and shrink before starting over. Meanwhile, black fog still poured from his sleeves and fueled the transformation. Before such a dreadful scene, even Zamira and Else couldn't stop their eyes from widening in disbelief. As for a start, while she'd been through legions of death matches, such eldritch a scene she had never seen. Clap. Conrad joined his hands, causing the flesh ball's transformation to reach its final stage. It turned into a 1.8 meters tall, genderless human frame with snow-white skin, a bald head, and closed eyes. However, though this slender human frame possessed arms and legs, no nose, ears, or lips stood on its figure. Conrad beckoned, and the dark fog pulled the makeshift creature toward him before lowering it onto the ground. "Master, what is that?" Astarte blurted, unable to restrain her shock. And though they didn't speak the words, Zamira and Elsa's faces clearly showcased them. More startling of all was that under the scrutiny of their origin sight, this makeshift body appeared completely flawless, devoid of impurity, devoid of imperfection, and only containing the best in the victims. That, my dear, is the future. Humanity's future. Conrad replied, and with another wave of his hand, the makeshift body vanished within his space ring. "Are you trying to create a new form of undead?" Else inquired, and hearing this, Conrad couldn't help but smile. He stood up, spun, and stepped toward the fallen Aaron tribe's exit, leading the three alongside him, while the Hidden Moon Pavilion's experts remained in their shadows. "Not just undead. I want true immortals." Meanwhile, Verena and Yvonne stepped deeper into the hidden forest, and recalling the broom they faced at its entrance, Verena couldn't help but sigh. No wonders the average expert can't make his way out of the hidden forest. To say nothing of what lies inside, that broom alone is enough to lead non-sages into perdition. Verena remarked while sweeping the murky forest with her origin sight. Even inside, the broom lingered, making it so that the atmosphere always maintained a gray shade and ensuring the unprepared wouldn't fare long. At the same time, danger lurked at every turn. Fortunately, their cultivation bases and means were profound. Otherwise, the many risks would have long since minced them into pieces. The hidden forest is the root of all the native fiend and restoration beast descendants in the ancient crystal world. It is an ancestral land that endured the arrival of the infernal cult and celestial church. This level of protection is no surprise. Of course, the only reason why the hidden forest's experts survived the Founders' era was because they were allowed to. Yvonne replied while they moved past an array of graying trees. Clearly, the world tree's withering wasn't leaving the hidden forest unharmed. Or rather, the withering source wasn't sparing them either. The world tree stood at the very center of the hidden forest. For the likes of Yvonne and Verena, a step was more than enough to reach it. However, on the one hand, they wished to investigate what befell the hidden forest's native experts, and on the other hand, they didn't want to alert the zenith ants of their presence. Therefore, they could only proceed with caution. But as they delved deeper in this dark, murky land, from the shadows of the forest, pairs of glittering eyes locked upon them. In an abrupt move, the trees surrounding them expanded and fired their enlarging branches at the duo, attempting to bind them where they stood. Verena waved her hand, causing magenta light to erupt and shred both branches and trees into wooden debris. Several hulky figures then emerged from the tree's shadows, massive demonic beasts of various shapes, but similar strength. Above them hovered a bulky humanoid figure, but the intensifying broom made the contours of his face hard to discern. "You've trespassed into our territory. Were it the past, we could have turned a blind eye to your presence. But now, I'm afraid you only have two choices. Follow us or perish," said the humanoid figure, and if the contours of his frame didn't make it evident before, it was now clear that he was male. "Incorrect, but I'm feeling generous today, so we can cut a deal. Become our mounts, and we can spare your life," Yvonne leisurely replied, and as soon as her words echoed, the demonic beast's eyes blazed with wrath. "Kill," the male ordered, and in tandem, the several beasts emerged from the broom to barrel into the two ladies. Each showcased a high-level restoration beast cultivation base. But of course, before Conrad's Empress, such strength was negligible. Yvonne raised her right hand, causing the 7 restoration beasts to drop on the ground in a single, resounding thud. Verena then made a grasping motion, forcing the 7 beasts to slide toward them, leaving their massive shapes in the ground as they did. Not good. The hidden male, who realized he'd just kicked an iron sheet, turned heels to run for dear life. The hidden forest was a unique environment where only sages could fly. Therefore, seeing the duo step into their territory on foot, he didn't believe them to be much of a threat, thinking they were some of those rare, lucky fools that managed to bypass the broom with low cultivation. But now, he was proven the fool, and before he could make his move, suppression? A word echoed from Yvonne's lips, and he found himself trapped by a tyrannical force. With a step, Yvonne then appeared before him, waving aside the broom to reveal his figure. Now, little mount, let's discuss," she instructed with her arms folded beneath her voluptuous chest, but though spoken in a mild tone, her words didn't sit well with the male whose forehead was now filled with cold sweat. Discuss, anything is discussable," he replied with a forced smile. And as Yvonne and Verena acquainted themselves to the hidden forest, Conrad's party was departing from the fallen Aran tribe to unleash the same fate on those unfortunate tribe that stood in their way as they proceeded toward Telhatra, the capital of the Northern Khanate. Chapter 311, The Hero the World Needs. Telhatra, the Northern Khanate's capital, a haven of sin and injustice where abusive slavery ran rampant, and the feeble could perish for a yes or a no. While the Holy Continent's denizens typically treated slaves like valuable commodities with output depending on the master's input, the barbarian continent's citizens thought otherwise. Within this half of the world, Slaves, especially those hailing from the Holy Continent, were treated no better than cattle. Their life expectancy was fairly low, and their existence is tragic. Moreover, contrarily to the Holy Continent, the majority of barbarian slaves were not human, but beast descendants snatched from the Holy Continent with the occasional spirit appearing among them. Naturally, spirit slaves were precious commodities the scions of powerful clans competed for. The right to abuse such goods was not cheap. As Conrad's carriage approached Telhatra, he could get glimpses of the massive megalopolis housing more than 80 million individuals on its own. Back when he'd first arrived in the ancient crystal world, such a population density would have undoubtedly startled him. But now, it couldn't even cause a ripple within his eyes. Instead, it was the curved domes and structures evoking the Azari style of the Persian architecture that grasped his attention. How such a structure was reproduced, God only knows. How many astronomical units from Earth was a mystery Conrad couldn't comprehend. And as he reached Telhatra's entrance, he couldn't help but wonder if the theory of the collective unconscious didn't hold more merit. Granted they could pay the entrance fee, Telhatra's gates welcomed all. Therefore, Conrad's carriage only stopped for an instant to pay the toll before carrying in. The streets abounded with life, legions of individuals that strutted back and forth, heading into another chapter of their lives. Little did they know that the entirety of their lives was about to undergo drastic changes due to the Profane prince's machinations. Let's first settle in an inn. We should appreciate what the city has to offer before overthrowing the monarchy, said Conrad, while the carriage approached the marketplace. I heard Telhatra produces the finest wine within the barbarian continent. We should indeed enjoy a sip. Else replied with her head leaning against Conrad's shoulder. But in that instant, he felt it was a pity his empress wouldn't be there to enjoy it too. And before they could bypass the marketplace, a commotion arose. In broad daylight conducting such vile a deed as a slave auction, don't you feel ashamed of yourselves? Release them at once. A voice thundered from within the marketplace, causing hundreds of footsteps to stop, and the eyes above to turn toward its origin. Slavery was common practice within the ancient crystal world, and Telhatra was notoriously known for its empowerment of the practice. Here, slave auctions didn't need closed doors, and the traders were free to parade the captives for all to see. Of course, a minority disliked the practice. However, even if they did, none would dare speak against it. After all, it was state-sponsored. Whoever challenged it was challenging the royal clan's will. Who was that bold? Who was that fool? Even Conrad's interest was piqued, and he pushed his head out of the window to better observe the scene. On a tall platform, 6 scantily clad young women with fully exposed assets and 5 bare-chested, muscular men stood for the potential buyers to appraise. Their value and the purposes they would serve was evident to all. However, it wasn't on them that eyes fell, but on a large, gruff man whose face looked as if it had been trampled by a stampede of 10,000 horses. A nose large enough to occupy half the face, huge, protruding lips that barely fit in a palm, tiny, barely noticeable eyes on a long, rectangular face and elephant-sized ears. Without a shred of hesitation, Conrad dared say that this was the most hideous-looking man he'd witnessed in 2 lives. Hideous, so hideous that it didn't look natural. Whoever laid eyes on him was struck speechless and forced to turn to avoid permanent damage. Even else couldn't help but blink in disbelief, not knowing what genetic combination produced such a dreadful individual. Surely, there was a reasonable explanation. Looks of horror filled the bystanders' eyes as they locked on that man, but as if entirely oblivious to those stares, he stood there, upright, with his massive body overflowing with righteousness and heroism. Seeing this pose, Conrad had a misconception and wondered if perhaps this wasn't the hero the world needed. But then, he probed the man's cultivation with his origin sight, and all his hopes crashed into nothingness. Impudence. The slavers' leader bellowed and raised his hand, summoning 5 armored guards that brandished their broadswords, ready to hack the intruder. Nowadays, ants truly don't know their bloody place. With your 6-step adept night cultivation, You dare speak such outrageous words before us? Do you know that I only need to report you to the authorities, and your entire family must follow you to the grave? Was life so sweet that you got tired of living?" The slaver snarled, annoyed that his good business was interrupted by this horrid man. Within the capital was an adept knight, not even fit to be a gatekeeper. To say nothing that even powerful clans would think twice before attempting to interrupt the slave trade. The only reason why the slaver had yet to strike was that he firmly believed that no man under the heavens was stupid enough to dive into such suicidal a situation without a solid backup plan. Perhaps an expert lied in the shadows, pulling the strings of this strange creature. However, before injustice, regardless of the difficulty, one must rise to oppose it. Not daring to empowers it, and since no one dares, I dare. In any case, my only relative is dying, and since she raised me for it, I'm sure she wouldn't blame me for battling the poison that festers our society. The hideous man roared back, reaffirming Conrad in the belief that the hero had finally appeared. Chapter 312, but not the one it deserves. What a fool. Another corpse for the pile. Never did I expect that with the royal clan's current prestige, someone would still dare voice such asinine complaints. The saying is right, newborn calves aren't afraid of tigers. Who cares? Seeing them go from unyielding to suppliant is always a refreshing sight. The bystanders exchanged while the hideous man's voice echoed within the slave trading section of the marketplace. And now, the slaver firmly believed that this repulsive man was nothing more than a lunatic. Even if the backer was mighty, what was it compared to the royal family? But this youth dared insult its dignity in such a glaring and pompous manner, no one could save him. Especially now that the royal clan was in full celebration. Dispose of him? The slaver bellowed, causing his 5 armored guards to shoot toward the hideous man. Their cultivations varied from the peak of the true knight rank to the middle grand knight rank. Therefore, no one believed that this youth avoid losing his head. And indeed, Conrad, who, with his origin sight, observed the scene from his carriage, firmly believed that the youth couldn't save himself. In fact, as he raised his sword to contend with the assailants, he seemed quite willing to accept his fate. Rescue him, he ordered his concealed hidden moon experts, causing Zamira, Else and Astarte's eyes to widen in disbelief. It was always Conrad that unleashed destruction on the innocent for selfish purposes. When was it time for him to take their defense? But unlike them, the Hidden Moon Pavilion's knights didn't ask themselves so many questions. A breeze blew on the scene. The 5 armored guards were minced into pieces, pieces that tumbled onto the ground. The sound of the mincing then echoed, and at that time, the people realized what had occurred. Fast. Too fast for anyone on the scene to comprehend. Speed that defied all understanding, far beyond sound or anything they could fathom. Clearly, this was the work of a concealed expert. The slaver's eyes went wide with fright. Could it be that this hideous man truly possessed some formidable backer? The thought made him stagger. And to say nothing of him, even the hideous man was startled. How was his imminent death so cleanly reversed? Did the gods finally take his grit into consideration and decided to save his country? At that time, Conrad's carriage opened, and he stepped out to head toward the hideous man, clapping as he did. Clap, clap, clap. The clapping sounds seemed to reawaken the slavers and bystanders whose eyes shifted toward him. However, his cloaked figure prevented anyone from seeing his actual appearance. What moral, what virtue? Today, my heart is filled with shame. Young hero, having heard your bold proclamations, I couldn't help but step out to make your acquaintance. Conrad declared with his arms crossed before his chest as per barbarian custom. You are? The hideous man asked with his tiny eyes squinting harder. Was it possible that this cloaked man was somehow related to his impromptu rescue? Just a passing merchant. I do not engage in honorable activities, however. Having heard your words, I can't help but want to turn over a new leaf. Come, come, please allow me to offer you a drink so that you may better enlighten me. Conrad offered while pulling the man by the shoulders, and as they departed, the slaver finally regained his wits. Do you think that you can, Jay? He began, but before he could finish his words, blood gushed from his chest, and his corpse dropped toward the ground. However, before it could, it vanished. Not only him, but the 5 armored guards' pieces were also nowhere to be found. Seeing this, the hideous man was startled, and all the bystanders lowered their eyes to return to their daily occupations. Aarg, what a horrifying sight! Telhatra is really a land of crouching tigers. Little ones like us can't afford to let down our guard here. Conrad lamented with a profound sigh, as if this strange scene had nothing to do with him, and motioned for the hideous man to step inside the carriage. As if attempting to see through truth and falsehood, the hideous man took one good look at his cloaked figure. Then, with a snort, he dived into the carriage and was startled to see 3 other cloaked figures sitting within. His frown deepened. Right behind his heels, Conrad stepped in and sat beside him. A succession of sighs left his lips. Never did I expect that on my first day in this city, I would witness such a scene. This really makes a man fear for his life. Perhaps it is heaven that's sending me a warning. He began in a downcast tone that caused the cloaked Else, Zamira, and Astarte to exchange confused looks. Else arched her eyebrows. Zamira shrugged, and Astarte no longer knew what was going on. However, the hideous man didn't let himself get swindled so easily and remained at the defensive. May I know your honorable name? Kerman. Kerman directly replied to Conrad's inquiry. Oh, good, very good. A heroic name for a heroic man. It couldn't be more fitting. Conrad nodded in approval while the carriage returned onto the roads, heading toward the Wandering Dream Inn, which ranked first within the Northern Khanate. Sir, seeing you struggle against injustice, I can't help but sigh and look down on myself. As you can see from my convoy, I'm no good things, engaging in the same act you despise. But today, I see the light and swear to change my ways. Alas, you may be the hero the world needs, but not the one it deserves. Your righteousness falls on deaf ears, and society itself prevents you from saving it. Conrad theatrically grieved, and his words caused Kerman to spin toward him with his eyes shining with dazzling light. Finally someone who understands my plight. Kerman sobbed while grabbing Conrad's hand into his. How can you save when the crushing majority doesn't wish to be saved? How can you defend when there is no support to be found? You can only preach in a desert and vainly hope your sacrifice will kindle some reaction. Indeed, hero, in a land where evil overthrew good and right became wrong, you have very little means to fight. However, on this day, I pledge to put my ill-gained wealth to help you out of your pickle. With your heart and my means together, we shall free the world of woes and bring righteousness back onto this land. Conrad pledged, causing the 3 ladies' eyes to expand further. Are you serious? I have never been more serious. Conrad replied to Kerman, whose heart overflew with excitation. The carriage then reached the Wandering Dream Inn, and Conrad immediately shoved the door open, motioning for Kerman to step out. Come, hero, let's drink and cement this new friendship. Else was scared witless. Chapter 3:13 Sworn Brotherhood. In tandem, the 2 stepped toward the Wandering Dream Inn and barged in with fanfare. A receptionist awaited them at the entrance and led them toward an unoccupied table. Else, Zamira, and Astarte, who stood several steps away, soon joined them. Their orders were quickly taken, and the receptionist departed to prepare them. Since you now have my name, don't you think you should reciprocate by giving me yours? Kerman asked, and who could blame him? Even now, Conrad kept his cloak on, preventing anyone from peeping at his real appearance. Although one was entitled to their secrets, no good friendship was ever built on deceit. Indeed, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Darnak, at your service, Conrad declared, causing Else to bite her lower lip to avoid betraying the play with a burst of laughter. Darnak? Never heard of that one. However, it matters not. Since you decided to embrace the righteous path and turn over a new leaf, you should also take on a new, matching name. However, Darnak is the name you received from your parents. Filial piety prevents us from abandoning it. But since as Darnak you lived in evil, we can simply reverse it to give you your name of righteousness. Darnak in reverse, from Darnak, you will now be Conrad. Kerman exclaimed with overflowing passion and zeal. In that instant, he couldn't help but feel quite proud of his genius. Cough, cough, cough. The words caused Conrad to choke on his saliva and cough without restraints. Else bit her lower lip harder, preventing the laughter she suppressed to erupt at full volume. "Conrad, are you okay?" asked Kerman, startled by the sudden cough. "No big deal, no big deal. I was just overwhelmed by emotions," Conrad replied, holding onto his chest while Else tapped his back. The talks then resumed, and as the duo exchanged, a waiter brought forth sumptuous silver plates of food. The establishment's trademark, Wandering Dream, wine came soon afterward. Each was served one glass before the bottle was laid on the table for them to consume throughout the remainder of their meal. To be perfectly honest, with your faces cloaked as they are, although I have good feelings regarding you, I can't bring myself to fully trust you. Upright men have nothing to hide, and no need to conceal themselves in the shadows of a cloak, Kerman declared while gulping his wine in a crude but candid manner. "Is that the reason why you don't wear one?" Astarte straightforwardly asked, thinking that this crude wannabe hero was too far ahead of himself. How dared he criticize her master? However, the words failed to trigger any reaction from Kerman, who merely raised his glass. "My chest is broad, my heart of gold, my shoulders light, my conduct upright, and my hands without sin. That being the case, why need I hide myself? If my looks repulse them, it is others that should hide from me, not the other way around." Kerman replied with his candor undamaged. His words struck Astarte speechless, and she no longer knew what to say. "I will drink to that. Come, let's have a toast," Conrad proclaimed before butting his glass against Kerman's and gulping his liquor. "Truth be told, we're trying to avoid troubles. With looks like ours, wherever we go, problems ensue. If we didn't wear cloaks, to say nothing of having a peaceful discussion, it would be a miracle if state troops weren't trying to enslave us," Conrad stated in a grave tone that pulled a scoff from Kerman's lips. "Aren't you exaggerating a little bit?" "Not one bit." The direct answer took Kerman aback, but then he wondered if, perhaps, he wasn't being too pedantic and no longer pursued the issue. But Conrad didn't let it go and motioned for the waiter to arrive, which he did in mere seconds. "Clear the inn in its entirety. I need to have a private discussion with my friend here," he ordered, causing the waiter's eyes to widen in disbelief. "We can't just clear the room because you—" he began, but before he could finish his words, Conrad tossed a purse into his hands. Opening it, the waiter was startled to see 100 holy crystals. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Holy crystals weren't something one could have access to because of mere wealth. Only saint-level clans regularly dealt in them, and even the scions of such clans couldn't toss 100 holy crystals so casually. These people's background was unfathomable. "As you command, as you command." The waiter bowed and excused himself, bringing the purse and order to his boss, who didn't hesitate before making his move and announcing the restaurant's imminent closure, forcing the other guests out without a care for face. Kerman, who didn't see the content of the purse, appeared startled. "Excessive. That was completely excessive," he remarked while gulping down another glass of wine. The Wandering Dream wine was a cultivation beverage. For mortals, it could extend their lifespans and reinforce their bodies. However, for cultivators, it would amplify the concentration of spiritual energy within their bodies and bring them closer to the next level. Therefore, Kerman wasted none of it. By the time the restaurant was cleared, Conrad had lowered his cloak, revealing his true appearance. Pooh! Unable to restrain himself, Kerman spat the wine he was gulping down before losing himself in a round of coughing. Else, Astarte and Zamira waved their hands, preventing the wine from staining Conrad's face. No wonders, was all Kerman could say, and unwilling to make things difficult for this good man, Conrad put his cloak back on. Now that this is out of the way, let's discuss proper business, Conrad stated while resting his chin on his clasped hands. You're finally willing to reveal the true reason for you bringing me here? Cameron replied. Indeed, he'd never fully bought Conrad's story and suspected some hidden motive. However, if Conrad couldn't harm him, there was nothing to fear. If he could, resisting wouldn't change the inevitable. Following him to get a better understanding of the situation was the best choice he could make. You misunderstand. Though I conned you into this meeting, I didn't really speak lies. I genuinely find you fascinating and am impressed by your demeanor. Thanks to you, I might really step on a new road and transform the world for good. And I do want something from you. But before that, I request we become sworn brothers. Conrad explained. Master, you can't be serious. Astarte blurted, speaking the words wreaking havoc within Else and Zamira's minds. And though he didn't comment, Cameron's eyes spoke the same. Serious, I'm dead serious. You must know that in my existence, though my servants are many, I have never taken a sworn brother. In fact, no one truly qualifies as my male friend. Conrad began with his glass raised. If you become my sworn brother, heaven and earth be my witness. If your wife is a beauty, I shall not covet her. If your riches are many, I shall not dispossess you. If my success requires me to step on you, I shall refrain. And if you ever need my assistance, my hand will always support you. Are you willing? Conrad asked while extending his glass toward Cameron for another toast. Chapter 3:14 Blood Mountain Range. For an instant, Cameron was startled, believing that in this world, crazier than him had finally appeared. But afterward, his lips curled into a smile, and he met the toast with his glass. Well said. Since you're this straightforward, I shall reciprocate in kind. My friends are not many, but if you dare become my sworn brother, I dare accept you. Cameron replied, while knocking his glass against Conrad's. In tandem, they gulped down their wine, thus sealing the pact. While setting his glass aside, Cameron locked his gaze onto Conrad, awaiting his next move. Like I said, since you're my sworn brother, I will naturally assist you. Feel free to tell me your plight. It's not impossible that I have the means to solve it. Conrad advised while laying down his glass and shouldering Cameron's inquisitive gaze. And hearing those words, the idealistic barbarian's face contorted into a frown. Why are you so certain of my need for assistance? He asked with a hint of caution. Would you believe me if I told you that I'm a seer? Aren't seers blind? Only the fake ones. Conrad replied with a mix of seriousness and amusement. The words caused Cameron to arc his eyebrows. Indeed, the fake are blind, the blind are fake. Well, you saw true. I'm indeed facing a terrible problem, but it's not one man can solve. Cameron began and released a profound sigh. My mother is slowly stepping into her twilight. At best several months, at worst several days, she will soon perish. As the words left his lips, Cameron lowered his eyes onto the table and clenched his large fists above his thighs. There is more to the story, Conrad affirmed with a simple smile. Nothing can escape you. It's neither old age nor disease that oppresses her, but an eldritch force none knows how to resist. This goes back to 10 years ago when barbarian continent, infernal cult, and celestial church's armies were destroyed to the last by the abomination. The start of Cameron's explanation caused Conrad and his lady's eyes to widen. The abomination? Yes, the one who now lords over the holy continent. The world's #1 monstrosity and a harbinger of mayhem and destruction. It is said his greed and savagery are only surpassed by his lust, and that he stops at no evil to reach his goals. I believe you holy continent citizens know him as the Profane Prince. Cameron replied, and thinking of that monstrous individual whose mere name kept the battle-hardened awake at night, even he couldn't help but shudder. Conrad's smile broadened. Interesting. Carry on. As you probably know, following his ascension, the infernal cult gathered and offered 1 billion barbarian denizens to the demon gods for the sake of self-preservation. Word is they obtained mighty boons. But regardless of the truth, this unprecedented slaughter didn't go without consequences. The 1 billion barbarians were executed in the Blood Mountain Range. Their blood littered thousands of miles. Half of it abruptly vanished, but the other half remained, forever marking the soil. Hence the name. In any case, following their demise, an unknown kind of energy spread from the Blood Mountain Range, bringing alongside it the birth of tens of thousands of dark purple lilies. At first, although no one knew the meaning of those lilies, or could access the nature of that new force, we didn't doubt that something born from the demise of 1 billion boded no good. No one dared approach, and soon the Blood Mountain Range became a forbidden zone. But then, several years ago, someone had the clever idea of making it a graveyard, using it to quietly dispose of his victims. Never did he expect that those he tossed into the Blood Mountain Range would one day return, alive and well, to gore him like a pig. As Kerman's explanation carried on, Else, Zamira, and Astarte were perplexed while Conrad could barely contain his excitement. Could it be a death zone? He asked Celine through the system. That seems to be the only plausible answer. Within mortal realms, the slaughter of hundreds of millions or more, in one spot, has a chance to trigger the creation of a death zone. It appears your dear mother unwittingly produced one. Celine replied, an interest clearly echoed within her words. For the average individual, a death zone was a ticket straight to hell. But for a blossoming death art cultivator, it was a treasure trove. Meanwhile, Kerman pursued. Naturally, when the news spread, the world was in awe, and many attempted to rush into the Blood Mountain Range to snatch the secret of rebirth. But whoever didn't return. From the lowest of cultivators to semi-saints, none could make the trip back. Several saints from the royal clans even attempted to sneak in, never to return. At the same time, those resurrected individuals began decomposing and rushed back to the Blood Mountain Range, thus further frightening the world. However, as you probably know, without resources, even with talent, cultivation is an arduous road, to say nothing that my talent is limited. Therefore, my mother hoped to snatch one of those flowers and sell them at a high price. Alas, she fell prey to the Blood Mountain Range and almost perished. However, you managed to rescue her. Unlike the others, you can go in and out, unscathed. Conrad cut before Kerman could finish his words, and seeing himself exposed, he didn't bother concealing. Indeed, for some reason, the energy within that place cannot affect me. Thanks to that, I managed to pull my mother out. But since then, her life force has been dwindling without any means of restoration. Kerman admitted, and indeed, the reason why Conrad paid him such close attention was that from within him, he could feel a substantial quantity of death essence. Although the numbers were by no means staggering, death essence was a lethal poison to all non-blossoming death art cultivators. Aside from them, only undead could possess it. But Kerman was by no means undead. Better, his constitution was absolutely ordinary, hiding no formidable physique or bloodline. At least, through his origin site, Conrad couldn't find anything peculiar. And even Celine through the system failed to find anything worth noting. This led him to believe that there was more to Kerman than met the eye. His background couldn't be as simple as what he currently portrayed. However, it mattered not. As long as he could be of use, even if he descended from the Lord of the Three Realms, Conrad would still use him. Chapter 315 Kiss My Boo. Moreover, from Kerman's story, Conrad hypothesized he wasn't just immune to death essence. Whoever stood in contact with him would find their resilience to it drastically increase. Otherwise, that mother of his couldn't have survived till now. At least, if that was the full story. Meanwhile, it seemed the recollection of those events had filled Kerman with sorrow, and his downcast gaze no longer rose to meet Conrad's. It's fine. I said it before. I will definitely lend you my hand. Others may not be able to save her, but for me, that requires no effort. As long as you have faith in me, her life is saved. Conrad asserted, and the confidence within his words lifted Kerman's eyes, which now shone with hope and expectations. If you truly have the means to save her, then from this day onward, as long as it doesn't betray my conscience, I will definitely follow your every word and go through fire and storms should you so wish. He proclaimed before slamming his forehead against the table in a makeshift kowtow. Now, Else, Zamira, and Astarte finally understood why Conrad held such a keen interest in this man. Clearly, he wanted to use him to cross certain hurdles within the Blood Mountain range. However, doubt still clouded Else's mind. Better than the others, she understood the profundity of Conrad's blossoming death art. Although it still was at the second layer, Chthonian energies could simply not affect his body. So why then did he need to rely on that man? Body, I see. Elsa's eyes widened in understanding, and she no longer pursued the matter. Good. That being the case, let's dash. Conrad began. But before he could finish his words, from the inn's entrance, a commotion arose. Bold, how dare you block my path? A pretty boy dressed in magnificent fur roared at the entrance. Several men of similar ages stood beside him with their eyes blazing with fury. However, the inn's guards didn't budge, preventing these young men from stepping in. Although they each possessed strong backgrounds within Telhatra, orders were orders, and they would not disobey them. Moreover, the Wandering Dream Inn's master was no pushover. No need to mention anything else. Just knowing that he was surnamed Circer was enough to put any unruly young master back in his place. Apologies, Prince Consort. The Wandering Dream Inn is closed for renovations, said the left guard without giving that Prince Consort any face. His rage burned brighter. Closed for renovations? You were open just an hour ago. How are you now closed for renovations? Are you insulting my intelligence? He snarled. On other days, he might have avoided a direct confrontation with the Wandering Dream Inn, but today, that was out of question. This was a celebration for the entire Northern Khanate. The royal clan brimmed with elation, and soon, even the Southern, Eastern, and Western Khans would make the trip to bring congratulatory gifts. On this day, if he couldn't outpace the others and make the princess happy in the future, how could he hold onto his prince consort title? The prince consort's hand jerked forth, erupting with low-level arch-knight cultivation. In the barbarian continent's secular world, for someone in his early 20s, such cultivation was exceptional, better than many princes. And it was this talent plus his own strong clan that allowed this pretty boy to remain the princess consort. The left guard found himself backhanded across the cheek and spiraling in the air before crashing against a nearby wall, whose cracking echoed with the crackling of his spine. You? Me what? Do you know that it's by the princess' will that I'm here today? If not for her, how dare I act with such fanfare? What? Do you think that with your measly status of gatekeepers you can interfere with her highness' will? The prince consort sneered, and his words made the remaining standing guard not know how to proceed. In the Northern Khanate, if one had to name the most prominent individual, it wouldn't be the Khan, but his daughter, the princess. The reason was simple. From the moment she was born, the princess shone in golden light. From birth, humans glittered in the color of their lineage. Therefore, this only meant one thing. She was a golden-blooded human. Within the barbarian continent, the golden-blooded humans were akin to deities, born without equal standing far above the masses. Only within House Circer could they be seen. And even there, they weren't the majority. The larger core of Circer descendants were purple-blooded humans, with another portion being a mix of purple and gold. The true golden-blooded humans were few and far between. Even the Northern Khan only was purple-blooded, a rare lineage that placed him a step above the other Khans and allowed him to gain the honor of one day returning to House Circer as a disciple. As for his daughter, she was destined for grander things. She didn't even need to pass the Circer examination to directly receive the house's training. Now that she turned 16, it was time for her to go through her coming-of-age ceremony, after which her family name would officially become Circer, and an elder would take her as a disciple. Circer elders were all sages. To become a sage's disciple was an honor most didn't even dare dream of. Naturally, Her status had already surpassed that of her father. Said bluntly, although his talent was outstanding and didn't garner shame in the secular world, if not for an agreement from before their birth, this prince consort would have never been able to take his seat. Therefore, he sought any means to please her and remain in her favor. Knowing how much she delighted in the wandering dream and delicacies, he was, of course, going to reserve the place for her. Never did he expect that before he could even make his bid, he would be shamed to this extent. You can thank the infernal kings that I've better things to do than play with your lot. Otherwise, humph. The prince consort snorted before stepping toward the door. However, his hand had yet to reach the handle that. The gate flew open, slamming his pretty face as it did, and sending him flying backward. Who did dash? As his words attempted to leave his lips, a foot bashed his face in, pinning his head onto the ground and mercilessly trampling him. His peers were startled. Within the confines of Tel Hatra, who dared act this insolently? But when their eyes locked on the cloaked figure whose features remained entirely hidden to the world, they quickly came to one conclusion. Organ traders. Chapter 316. Do I look like an organ trader? While most illegal things within the Holy Continent turned out entirely legal within the barbarian continent, thus, voiding the need for a black market, some trades still faced more regulation than others. Prime among them was organ trading. Though primarily affecting mortals and low-level cultivators, there were times when, due to peculiar wounds, even high-level cultivators would find themselves unable to repair their organs through pills and meditation. At that time, they would need carefully nurtured organs to replace those they lost. Therefore, organ trading was one of the most lucrative businesses, but at the same time, the most brutal. After all, unless faced with an abime of desperation, no one would willingly surrender their organs. For that reason, many feeble but state-protected individuals found themselves under the knives of those traders. The government would naturally not allow its authority to become undermined by one trade, and not only increase the taxes on organ trading, but also force the traders to compile the sources of their product and the identities of their donors. Soon, many of the affluent but recalcitrant traders opted for underworld dealings, hence creating the black cloak merchant trend. When Astarte appeared in her spacious black robe and cloak that made her features impossible to discern, those young masters immediately assumed her to belong to one of those groups and recoiled in fright. Hearing this, Astarte was startled. How could underworld dealers possibly parade themselves in broad daylight? Wasn't that asking for the authorities to lower their axes on their neck? What did those good-for-nothing buffoons eat that their brains worked in such odd manners? Of course, her stupor lasted only for the fraction of a second, and while the prince consort kissed her boot from below, she swept those buffoons with her hazel eyes. The wandering dream in is currently reserved. Get lost, she declared before kicking the prince consort's side and sending him flying toward his peers with a resounding scream. Thinking that they were now dealing with notorious organ traders, the buffoons were more prudent. In the barbarian continent where the right of the biggest fist reigned supreme, the likes of them were not valued. However, they still possessed strong clans and decent cultivation, which allowed them to hover around the prince consort. But if anyone asked them to lay down their lives for him, they would, of course, disdainfully snort. And as they planned to rush back to their clans to relay the events, the prince consort rose from the ground and aimed a wobbling index at Astarte. Bold. Do you know who I am? Do you think that just because of your underworld tycoon status you can deter me? Let me tell you, I'm Zaber Dyer, Princess Helbin's consort, the #1 prince consort of the Northern Khanate. Astarte was shocked speechless, and her mouth widened in an O shape. When did she become an underworld tycoon? How could a normally constituted individual possibly form such a line of reasoning? Did underworld tycoons also reserve ends at noon? Baffled by those idiots, she resolved to further investigate the current trends of the underworld. Perhaps she really was in the wrong. And seeing her not know what to say, Zaber believed his identity scared her out of her wits and confidently pursued. What? Scared now? Alas, it's far too late. Even if you beseech me to spare your life, I will never let you off. How dare you step on my esteemed face? Tired of living? Impudence! I will slaughter your entire family. Slaughter your 9 generations. Terrified? Too bad. That's just the beginning, because I will also slaughter your future generations. Yes, even the ones that have yet to dash. Before Zaber's tirade could reach its grand finale, Astarte flicked her hand, releasing a silent pressure that slammed into his pompous face and making him shoot across the sky to crash in an unknown, faraway location. The remaining buffoons were scared witless and quickly bowed in submission. Benefactor, we have nothing to do with that man. In fact, he captured our relatives and forced us to entertain him through all kinds of blackmailing. It's only for the sake of our loved ones that we stood beside him. Please understand our plight. They explained, while repeatedly bowing toward Astarte. You are our benefactor, our grand savior. In the future, we will definitely repay your kindness. But for now, we must take our leaves. With that said, they heaved deep sighs, then turned heels, secretly praising one another for being quick-witted while swaggering away. Astarte could no longer restrain herself and instantly fired 5 kicks. Warg. Like meteors, the 5 good-for-nothing buffoons raced across the sky, as if trying to outdo one another, before crashing in the distance. With a sweep of her sleeve, Astarte turned heels, rushing back into the wandering dream in where Conrad's lunch with Kerman came to an end. Master, the troublemakers have been taken care of, she announced while bowing toward Conrad. He wasn't about to pay this matter more attention, but then he saw the confused look on her face, a look that forced him to arch his eyebrows. Any unexpected occurrence? Why do you seem so puzzled? He asked in a concerned tone, but Zamira and Else, who'd heard the entirety of the commotion due to the acute hearing Conrad no longer possessed, shook their heads and sighed. Master, do I really look like an organ trader? The question took Conrad aback, and he blinked in disbelief. Of course not. My Astarte is a country-toppling beauty able to launch 1,000 ships. Even cloaked as you are, you overflow with grace and elegance. Who dares compare you to an organ trader? Conrad directly replied, his words causing Kerman to disdainfully snort. Wasn't this a tad bit excessive? In the meantime, Else tilted her head to the left while her sky-blue eyes remained locked on Conrad. If her thoughts were a mystery, her eyes seemed to be screaming, "Oh, really?" I thought so too. Master, Telhatra's juniors seem afflicted with a peculiar disease. In the future, we will have to tread carefully. Perhaps it's contagious. With your current condition, we can't afford to take chances. Astarte declared in a grave tone heightened Conrad's interest in what she faced outside. But ultimately, he didn't pursue it and shifted his attention back onto Kerman. Brother, it's time to save your mom. Meanwhile, Verena and Yvonne stood trapped within legions of demonic beasts of various ranks, but their eyes looked beyond the beasts to lock on a fearsome, bare-chested man of almost 3 meters who comfortably sat within a leaf throne. Chapter 317 Asinine Waste. Yvonne's captive had proven himself quite capable, and freely revealed the information he held, answering all questions with remarkable frankness while leading the duo toward his tribe's central dwelling. From him, Verena and Yvonne finally understood the structure and hierarchy of the Hidden Forest forces. They were divided in 5, each representing a lineage and ruled by a knight general. However, many restrictions within the Hidden Forest ensured outsiders couldn't make use of their full powers. Thanks to that and the founder's initial mercy, those 5 factions managed to maintain their independence from the Celestial Church and Infernal Cult over the eons. But while the people of the Hidden Forest possessed strong constitutions, they failed to produce a knight paramount across 1 million years. They respectively were the Serpent Tribe, the Blood Beast Tribe, the Sekhmet Beast Tribe, the Anzu Beast Tribe, and the Black Swan Tribe. Meanwhile, unbeknown to them, the Ant Queens and Goddess stood within the roots and base of the World 3, draining it of its boundless life essence and vitality to fuel their growth and expand their colony. Now, The Zenith Ants colony stretched across the underground with an incalculable number of warriors. Worse, having been a part of the hidden forest for so long, and with their connection to the World Tree, they obtained the right of citizenship and weren't subject to the hidden forest's foreigner restrictions. Therefore, when they rose from the undergrounds to invade the hidden forest, no one could resist them. No tribe could resist them. In a flash, the Sekhmet, Anzu, and Black Swan, the three weaker tribes, were forced into submission and became the dogs of the Zenith Ants. Although slightly stronger, the remaining two shouldn't have fared much better. But thanks to their peers' fate, they understood an all-out battle would either result in their surrender or death, and chose to use their ancestral formations as blockades to prevent further invasion. Thanks to that, the entirety of their tribes were invisible to the Ant Elders, who could no longer lead their troops into more land annexation. It was also for that reason that Yvonne's captive so candidly explained everything. Even if they knew, it mattered not. The only reason why they could capture him was due to his carelessness. But as long as they stood within his serpent tribe's territory, they couldn't raise any storm. However, he also revealed a new piece of information that filled Yvonne and Verena with a sense of urgency. The Blood Tribe was ready to surrender, and if it did, the Serpent Tribe would most likely follow. The silent clashes of the hidden forest were the only reason why the Zenith Ants' armies had yet to flood the barbarian continent. Once all the tribes were pacified, the barbarian continent would be next, and after it, the Holy Continent would follow. With Conrad's current state, Yvonne would naturally not allow things to develop in that direction. Therefore, she resolved to take the bull by the horns and force the conclusion she sought. Following several hours of walk, they reached the Serpent Tribe's headquarters, where beasts and fiends gathered in startling numbers to welcome them all. Clearly, they had been alerted of what occurred, and stood ready to handle Conrad's consorts. Among the beasts were nature serpents, poisonous serpents, winged serpents, and many others. But the distinction of serpent fiends was much simpler, and they all seemed to belong to one race. Though, it would be a mistake to think it so. On a massive green leaf throne, a fearsome giant with slit silver eyes, crest-styled hairs, and a long black beard sat with his cheek resting on his fist. The aura rippling from him was by far the strongest of the gathered individuals, standing at the limit of the Knight General rank, and infinitely close to the peak. It didn't take a genius to identify him as the Serpent Tribe's chieftain. "Welcome, outsiders. I must say that I didn't expect you to be the first to see through our tribe's cloaking formation. Impressive," he declared with an indifferent tone. From the gathered intel, he knew that unlike those Zenith Ants, Verena and Yvonne were not blind within their tribe's territory and could freely come and go. Although the cloaking formation was only the first layer and their tribe's survival relied on more formidable formations, it still was enough to keep the Zenith Ants at bay and strike them from the shadows. Clearly, those two relied on some mighty extrasensory ability even their formation couldn't swindle. And indeed, on one hand, the duo's origin site was leagues above what it was in the past, and on the other hand, Verena could rely on Seer's vision to break all phantasms. "I will not beat around the bush. I hear you plan to surrender to the Zenith Ants. Is that accurate news?" Yvonne directly asked, causing the Serpent Chieftain to arc his eyebrows. "In your current situation, I'm afraid you're not entitled to ask questions. However, I've always respected strong-willed and outstanding women, so why not? Indeed, should the Blood Tribe surrender, we will follow suit." The Serpent Chieftain replied. As he spoke, no ripple flashed on his face. "May I ask why?" This time, it was Verena that spoke. While Yvonne cared very little for the surrendering party's plight and reasons, Verena believed that if diplomacy could amend the situation, there was no need to resort to arms. Following her inquiry, the chieftain shook his head. "In that matter, there is nothing to hide. The situation is going from bad to hopeless. The Zenith Ant Elders were already troubling enough, but thanks to our ancestral formations, I can feel the Ant Queens are about to go out of seclusion and emerge from the World Tree. When they do, fighting becomes meaningless. At best, We can hide here throughout eternity, hoping they have no way to break our formations. But even that is no long-term plan. Even in the case they don't have the means, the goddess definitely has the ability. To say nothing of the fact that our formation strength comes from the hidden forest. When the world tree's withering reaches its final stage, our formations will lose all powers, thus leaving us exposed. I'm not afraid of death, but I have no interest in dragging all my tribesmen into oblivion with me for the sake of a fleeting moment of glory. If the Blood Tribe is willing to join hands to fight for a way out, I'm willing to take the bet. But if not, we might as well surrender and leave an escape road for the future generations. The Serpent Chieftain explained in the same calm and direct tone. Naturally, Verena could understand his plight and was willing to use logic to shift the chieftain's reasoning. But before she could speak further, asinine waste, Yvonne's voice echoed, and those two simple words turned the still peaceful gathering into a burning stove. The Serpent Chieftain's eyes contorted into a frown, and the full might of his pressure erupted to lock on her. "Are you tired of living?" he asked in the calmest tone he could muster under these circumstances. But unalarmed, Yvonne merely folded her arms beneath her chest and sneered. "No, but you are," she began, and stepped forward, releasing her own pressure that effortlessly dispelled that of her soon-to-be foe. "The enemy is at your doorstep, threatening to obliterate your very future, but instead of actively seeking ways to overcome the threat, you idle in your pathetic throne, waiting for another tribe's move to make your decision. What are you, a ruler or a third-rate politician?" With her tone full of derision, Yvonne took another step forward. Her pressure intensified, forcing the legions of demonic beasts to recoil with massive blood spurts. Chapter 318, Surrender Your Tribe. If the withering is not averted, the cultivation world doesn't have a future. The zenith ants live for destruction. Of course, they do not care. But how could you be so muddled as to think it will not affect your tribe? Without natural sources of energy and opportunity for growth, once the stagnation settles in, for the sake of their development, your young demonic beasts will turn against one another, creating internal warfare and the slow but inevitable destruction of your tribes. With your strength, you could suppress it. But if you do, as time goes by, your tribe's strength will plummet, giving the others the opportunity to extinguish you and turn you all into resources. And vainly assuming things don't progress this way, do you really think the zenith ants are interested in servants? You are just the cannon fodders they use for a temporary clash. When the goddess rises, what purpose do you serve? They exist for destruction. It's imprinted by hell's will within their lineage. Of course, they will destroy you. Yvonne mocked while taking another step forward, and the pressure erupting from her compelled all those demonic beasts to lower their heads onto the ground, trembling before her might. As a serpent lord, you have no backbone and endlessly fidget within your seat while weighing the best way to extend your comfort. We might as well say things for what they are. You dread an uncertain battle. It is due to degenerate descendants of your kind that the serpent race no longer awes the world. Allow me to be blunt. I didn't come here to entertain trash. The zenith ants' recent deeds got on my nerves, and whoever refuses to stand against them might as well surrender his life. But considering our ancestry are the same, I give you one opportunity to relinquish your seat and surrender your tribe to me. Do so, and I can spare your life, allowing you to spend the remainder of your pitiful days as the spineless waste you crave to be. Yvonne declared with a final step, and now, even the infernal knights could barely prevent themselves from shivering. With his eyes red from fury, the serpent chieftain slammed his thigh and leaped from his leaf throne, directly landing before Yvonne and preventing her from further oppressing his kin. As he clenched his fists in flaring ire, no hint of calm remained on his fearsome figure. In my tens of thousands of years of existence, never have I suffered such shame. But if you think your half-step divine blood cultivation is enough to run amok in my tribe, allow me to bring you back to earth. And without another word, he punched out. As a late-stage knight general, The Serpent Chieftain's cultivation was equal to a late-stage divine transformation rank expert, but in terms of battle power, he was slightly above. Meanwhile, within the hidden forest, foreigners like Yvonne couldn't employ more than 70% of their strength, thus giving the locals an absolute advantage. Yet, Yvonne didn't flinch, and as the fist approached her enthralling figure, she met it with a punch of her own. Massive divine power erupted alongside the might of her physiques, and as the punches met, a violent shockwave distorted the atmosphere, spreading toward the nearby beasts and fiends. The infernal knight stepped forward, forming force fields that blocked the shockwave and space distortion to prevent massive loss of life. Bang! Yvonne and the chieftain's fists collided in a thunderclap that hacked at the eardrums of the gathered audience. Crack! The chieftain's fist crackled, and with his phalanges wailing from beneath the cover of his flesh, he flew backward, racing back to his leaf throne. His eyes widened in disbelief. But before he could land back into it, Yvonne appeared in his trajectory, and with her back facing him, sent a back kick straight into his skull. The chieftain's world spun, and like a ragdoll, he spiraled into the air before crashing on the ground, returning to the circle formed by his kin. Needless to say, their eyes had widened in disbelief. A leaf throne? What are you trying to say? That your rule stands in harmony with nature? In harmony with the hidden forest? Laughable. Yvonne scoffed, and with a wave of her hand, the leaf throne burned to ashes. Although this was no ordinary material, to extinguish it, she only needed a move. With a 180-degree spin, she switched her attention back onto the chieftain, whose eyes shone with confusion. For a true monarch, thrones and crowns are just a convenient ornament. The body is the throne. The body is the crown. If I rise, you must bow. If I stand, you must kneel. When your presence induces deference, and your every glance, awe, you can truly call yourself a monarch. Crack. One moment, Yvonne stood before the leaf throne's ashes. The next, she was sending the chieftain rolling in the sky with a vicious uppercut. His chin broke, and his teeth quivered from the impact. When did the ancient crystal world produce such a monstrosity? The confused chieftain wondered while his skull, chin, and hand crackled from the blows they suffered. With the gap of 2 ranks and the suppression of the hidden forest, she could still beat him black and blue, utterly unharmed. What sorcery was this? If this carried on, henceforth, how could he maintain his dignity as chieftain? Was there really no other option than using the formation? And seeing the chieftain abused to this extent, Verena knew only the complete and brutal suppression of the serpent tribe could allow them to carry on. Really, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and birds of the same kind will flock together. In this world, I'm afraid only Conrad dares make this nutcase his empress. Verena sighed and stretched out her hands, releasing a magenta fog that stretched throughout the atmosphere. Instantaneously, the infernal knights ready to aid their chieftain found themselves ensnared by profound dreams they couldn't extricate themselves from. At the same time, Yvonne appeared above the chieftain, landing on his face with her right foot and forcing him into the ground through the suppression of her physiques. With his face kissing the dirt, he finally regained his wits. Devious slut, get lost. He snarled and activated his tribe's formation. Without warning, violent tremors rose and spread throughout the land while the pressure around Yvonne and Verena intensified, making them only able to release 10% of their strength. An irresistible shockwave erupted from the chieftain, forcing Yvonne to recoil and backflip to return on her feet. As if animated by an eldritch force, the trees and leaves rose to hover around Yvonne, trapping her in an ever-shrinking formation. Sorry, having only been with one man across centuries, I dare I say I'm quite the proper woman. If anything, my beloved husband is the slut of the couple. Yvonne replied while dozens of dark green energy orbs formed and aimed at her. The echo of those words curved Verena's lips into a forced smile. That aside, I might as well use you to test my new skill. Dowlaw, Extermination Fist. As the words left Yvonne's lips, The massive killing intent she suppressed erupted alongside waves of darkness and hellfire to coat her figure while an aura of invincibility burst from her form. Feeling the profound principles lying within this rising force, the chieftain was scared witless and recoiled from fright. Chapter 319 Tao Law. A Tao Law? How can this be? How old are you? What is your cultivation, and what understanding of heaven and earth do you possess? Impossible. This is simply impossible. The serpent chieftain roared in indignation. Tao laws were the supreme principles of the divine path and the last requirement to reach godhood. Without at least an incomplete Tao law, none could achieve godhood. Most could only comprehend them within divine ascension, and even then, few could form a complete Tao law. They also were the foundation of God rank arts. Anyone with a complete Tao law could turn it into their first God art upon ascending to godhood. Dasra's Tao law was incomplete, and for that reason, his strength still was a step below the infernal and celestial founders at their prime. Because possessing a grand Tao was the smallest of requirements, to complete a Tao law before divine ascension, or at least the peak of divine transformation, was an impossible task. Moreover, full mastery of at least one realm law was required. Full mastery of a law-wielding. Even among peak-stage divine ascension experts, not many dared boast such an ability. Dasra, for example, was a nature wielder, while Akash and Nahal respectively only were quasi-fire and water wielders. Mastering one law was the divine rank's usual limit. However, if his senses didn't betray him, the chieftain was feeling at least two mastered laws, the law of darkness and the law of fire. Tao laws were not made equal. If Yvonne truly mastered two, then even if he used the strength of his entire tribe, this blow was not what he could stop. And to say nothing of him, even Verena failed to believe her eyes. In the years they spent in the tower, Yvonne's understanding of the laws and the perfection of her Tao was indeed approaching a consummate level. However, it still was far from this step. It appeared that the fight with Dasra allowed her to fill the gaps, perfect her laws, and give birth to this new art. Feeling the might of this ability, Verena didn't doubt that even without the Valkyrie armors, the current Yvonne could beat the likes of Akash Black and Blue. And though they stood in the same camp, she couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. If her growth pace didn't increase soon, she wouldn't even be able to stare at Yvonne's back. I exist to make the impossible possible, Yvonne leisurely replied and punched. Formation strike. The serpent chieftain bellowed and released the full might of his tribe's formation. The trees and leaves glittered in forest green energy while the energy orbs expanded before releasing dozens of dreadful energy beams toward Yvonne. Meanwhile, the trees and leaves turned into a forest green storm of light that supported the dark green beams and closed in on her, to say nothing of the hidden forest's foreigner suppression. This blow alone was enough to shred the average divine ascension expert into pieces. Still, she showed no fear. From her punch, darkness erupted, spreading toward the entirety of the tribe to control the hearts, worries, and negativity of all those it brushed. At the same time, a hellfire tempest rose, blowing the formation's strike into nothingness before breaking the chieftain's control and blasting him into the sky with a charred body and ghastly wounds. And this result was merely because Yvonne showed mercy. If she wanted to, with that strike alone, no one within that tribe could live to retell the events. Boom! In an eruption of dust, the chieftain cratered. "You are abnormal," he struggled to say while blood gushed from his lips and his body fumed from the seething wounds. The blow wasn't just physical but hacked at the victim's heart and soul. Now, to say nothing of the ability to, the chieftain couldn't even muster the desire to rise. From the weakest beast to the strongest infernal knight, the entirety of the serpent tribe was on its knees. With several relaxed steps, Yvonne stopped before the serpent chieftain. Submission or death? She directly asked. Never in his life had this chieftain witnessed such an overbearing tyrant. Within his ancient heart, The desire to submit to this tyrannical woman rose and spread. Even if you take ownership of my tribe, you can neither control its formation nor possess its asylum, he explained without a hint of malice. I naturally know that, Yvonne replied. Things being what they were, she could only snatch what she could and give up the rest. However, never did she expect the chieftain's following words. But what if you could? The inquiry forced her to arch her eyebrows. Then, I would, she declared while keeping her eyes locked on the battered chieftain's face, eyeing all changes in his expression while listening to the tiniest waves in his heartbeat. There is a way. The ancestral sea, if you can soak in. Chief, you cannot. The tribal elders roared in tandem, preventing the chieftain from finishing his words. Yvonne's interest was piqued, and ignoring them, the chieftain carried on. If you can, soak in the ancestral blood lake for 7 days and 7 nights. Not just my tribes. You can take control of all the formations within the hidden forest and bring the 5 tribes under your rule. Better, your cultivation and physiques will rise to new levels. Pooh. As the chieftain's explanation carried on, he spurted a large mouthful of blood. Yvonne ignored it. What's the catch? You might not survive. No one ever did. Hearing this, Yvonne stretched out her hand, injecting some of her demonic energy into the chieftain, enough to keep him awake and functional, then lifted him in the air with a wave of telekinetic power. Does he speak true? She asked Verena, whose eyes flashed with complex emotions. Yes, she replied after a glance at the chieftain. Never would he know that with that simple glance, the entirety of his past flashed within Verena's eyes. Lead the way, Yvonne ordered and motioned for the serpent chieftain to lead the 2 of them toward the ancestral blood lake. Are you not the slightest bit worried? He asked, startled by how readily Yvonne stepped toward that potentially lethal fate. For the sake of my man's aspirations, I will never retreat. Hearing this, the serpent chieftain's heart sank into an incomprehensible abysm. Meanwhile, Conrad fulfilled promises. Chapter 320 Conrad to the Rescue. Following the wandering moon in events, Kerman led the way toward his humble abode. And although Conrad didn't expect it to be anything extravagant, only when he reached the area did he understand how much of an understatement the word humble was. Kerman's steps and a succession of teleportation circles led them to a secluded spot within Tel Hatra, one most natives were not even aware of, the slums. There, closely packed and decrepit houses competed for the title of least humane dwelling of the year. With the level of wealth and opulence Tel Hatra possessed and the grandeur it showcased, few would expect such an area to exist within its bounds. With but a glance, Conrad spotted several houses on the verge of collapsing, while disease-riddled individuals populated the streets. As they passed, Kerman tossed what little coin he held toward the most unfortunate of them all. With your background, I suppose you've never been exposed to this level of poverty before, right? Kerman inquired as they crossed the streets to head toward his dwellings. Indeed, though I've always lived the life of a king and grew up in rather shabby conditions, poverty of this level I have never witnessed, Conrad replied in a straightforward tone, causing Kerman to release a helpless sigh. Of Tel Hatra's 80 million citizens, more than 500,000 live here. We are the lowest of the low, the bottom of the social stratum. No one cares for us, and most hope we die faster. It is a miracle to see a cultivator emerge from these parts. Kerman explained while shifting toward a dark alley. The population here also serves as free labor. When earth mages are not available, we pile blocks and build the roads for a bit of porridge to sustain ourselves, and when our population reaches a certain limit, we're culled back to 500,000. According to my mother, my father died crushed under a block during a construction project. With his fists clenched till his nails dug past his flesh, Kerman stepped into the alley, bringing Conrad's party toward a small, isolated house whose deteriorating walls perfectly matched the surroundings. Pushing open the door, he stepped in and gestured for Conrad's party to follow suit. Mother, your unworthy son is back. he exclaimed with the light of futile hope shining within his eyes. A silence ensued, after which Cameron lowered his gaze to heave another sigh before leading Conrad's team toward his mother's chambers. In the dimly lit room, an ordinary-looking, middle-aged woman without an ounce of cultivation lied on a simple but neatly kept bed. To the onlooker, she might have seemed asleep. However, else, Zamira and Astarte could hear her exceedingly feeble pulse that slowly headed into silence, while Conrad could feel the death essence spreading throughout her body. "Indeed, it is as I thought," he muttered with a smile. If before it was mere conjectures, the current condition of Cameron's mother convinced him that the mother-son pair had stepped into a death zone. Were it not for that, within the ancient crystal world, she could never come across such a large concentration of death essence. And with that intel confirmed, Conrad shifted his gaze toward Cameron, who eyed him with a hopeful gaze, clenched teeth and trembling muscle. "Have no fear, I can definitely save her," Conrad replied to Cameron's unspoken question. And hearing this, he immediately relaxed. At last, there was hope. "Though, I'm afraid I must ask, are you sure your father died under a block?" Conrad inquired with a smirk. Taken aback by such an impromptu question, Cameron scratched his head in confusion. "I have never met him, so I wouldn't know. But since my mother said so, it must be true," he replied in a firm, unwavering tone. For an instant, Conrad considered having else use Seer's vision on Cameron, but ultimately decided against it. The reason was simple. If a truly formidable existence hid behind him, then they could alert him or her through that probe and reveal themselves unprepared. Not investigating further, Conrad stretched out his right hand, aiming it at Cameron's comatose mother. "I don't believe it is wise to play with a person whose latent abilities I can't fully assess," Celine cautioned from within the system. And indeed, she was right. Even Tauratha's tricks couldn't escape Celine's eyes. However, Cameron's secrets could. Within the three realms, how many individuals could place themselves above the Southern King of Hell? The implications were dreadful. Therefore, to avoid variables, Celine believed it best Conrad distance himself from that cheaply gained sworn brother of his. However, he thought otherwise. "What you're thinking of, how can I not know? However, in my current condition, diving into a death zone is suicidal. I might be immune to death essence. My body might possess unparalleled resilience. But what about my soul?" The question awoke Celine to another issue they faced. Right, your soul power is sealed. Right now, your soul is no different from a mortal's. The most casual of spiritual attacks can end your life. Meanwhile, the death zone will probably overflow with ghost legions. She realized. Indeed, legions of lingering souls turned ravenous ghosts most definitely await us inside. But since they dare not approach Cameron, we can use him as our shield to harvest all we need. Also, we can sow good karma. Who knows, in a near or distant future, it might come in handy. Conrad explained while pitch-black mist emerged from Cameron's mother's pores and orifices to dive into his right palm and fuel his body. "You, sowing good karma? Utterly shameless." Celine scoffed, and before that eldritch healing scene, Cameron's turned speechless while his eyes widened in disbelief. Is he taking her death into him? He wondered, unable to grasp the process of Conrad's move. But as he witnessed his mother's eyelids tremble, his massive body teemed with joy, and he rushed toward her side. In a flash, a rosy, healthy glow replaced the pale hue of her skin. Her limbs trembled, and her eyes opened. The last bit of black mist vanished within Conrad's hand, and he lowered his hands, signifying the treatment's end. "Mother, your unworthy son greets you. Your unworthy son greets you." Cameron kowtowed before his awakening mother, who couldn't comprehend the situation she found herself in. The last thing she recalled was stepping into the Blood Mountain range. As for what occurred afterward, it was all blurry. "Brother Cameron, my promise is fulfilled. I will let you mother and son enjoy this moment of privacy. In the following days, I shall contact you," Conrad declared and turned heels. Seeing him depart in such haste, Kerman didn't bother with trifles and kowtowed toward his leaving form, saying only a few words. "I stand at your service." Hearing this, Conrad's smile broadened, and he waved the back of his left hand at the young barbarian. "I shall hold you up on that." Shortly afterward, Conrad returned to the inner city alongside his ladies. "Next target?" Else asked as they stepped back in the inner city. "The royal palace, of course. It's time we take over this country." As he spoke, the amiable look on Conrad's face vanished, replaced by wicked, fiendish eyes and a wolfish grin. Same old principle: subdue the men, take their women. Chapter 321: The Fate of a Foolish Prince Consort. Hidden Moon Pavilion. The three words had barely left Conrad's lips that 12 figures clad in winged, black crystal armors knelt beside him and replied to his call. "Your Majesty." "Infiltrate the Northern Khanate's royal palace," and Conrad began. But before he could finish his words, Zamira's voice echoed. "Master, why not allow me to handle this? I have a way to make this more interesting." She offered with a faint smile. "Oh, very well. In any case, this is half for you. Do as you please. I will allow you to take command of my guard, but I want results before the end of the day. In the meantime, I will be sightseeing." Conrad replied before pulling Else by the right hand and a start by the left to vanish within the crowd. "As you command," and in a white haze, Zamira vanished to reappear before the royal palace, which currently was full of bluster. Following the humiliating thrashing he suffered before the Wandering Dream Inn, the prince consort Zaber Dyer dragged his wounded body toward the only one he believed able to give him justice: his wife, Princess Helbin. But as he reached her quarters, a quintet of guards blocked him at the entrance. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked in indignation. "Princess Helbin didn't anticipate your visit. You can't go in unannounced," replied the guard standing at the middle, without sparing Zaber a glance. Clearly, that prince consort title bore no weight in that guard's eyes. And how could it? After all, though his status was low, his surname still was Surker. Even that northern Khan had to give him face, to say nothing of a trivial in-name prince consort. Zaber could naturally see through the guard's thoughts. However, be it in terms of cultivation or background, they simply didn't play in the same league. Therefore, regardless of how wronged he felt, he could only restrain himself. Suppressing his spleen, Zaber gave a polite bow toward Helbin's guard captain. "That being the case, please announce me," Zaber asked in a respectful tone. However, the princess asked to not be disturbed for the next 3 hours. "Please wait until she's done resting," the guard declared, then no longer paid Zaber any attention. By his side, his subordinates sneered, with a few unable to suppress a chuckle. They all stemmed from the main house, and although their status over there was not worth mentioning, at the very least, it was the main house. In terms of resources and environment, how could this trivial country compare? To say that they enjoyed their current position in the Northern Khanate would be the deception of the century. Naturally, they wouldn't mind venting their spleen on those self-imbued nobles. In any case, it wasn't like anything good lied in that prince consort's future. When the princess coming-of-age ceremony came to an end, and the foreign khans presented their gifts, it would be time for her deflowering night. And what Zaber didn't know was that on the one hand, he would only be one of the many men selected to serve her, and on the other hand, the males would all see their cultivation harvested. Afterward, he would vanish in the shadows of Helbin's harem. What kind of respect did such a prince consort deserve? Unaware of their thoughts and fuming in silence, Zaber sat cross-legged before Helbin's chambers, awaiting the right to step in. And recalling how close they used to be in the past, he couldn't help but sigh. Where was the proximity of those days? Where were the big brother Zaber? Now, without an appointment, he couldn't even see her silhouette. How was this a marriage? But regardless of his inner thoughts, Zaber could only endure. After all, clinging on to Helbin was the only way for him to step into House Surker and obtain more benefits. 3 hours passed before his presence was announced, and Helbin invited him in. As soon as he crossed the door, Zaber put on his brightest smile and rushed toward Helbin, whose figure lied hidden beneath a luxurious canopy bed silk curtain. Helbin, he began, but before he could finish his words, a haughty yet mellifluous voice cut. Not kneeling. Hearing this, Zaber maintained a forced smile and dropped on his knees. How could I not? Greetings, my princess. He replied with a polite bow. His words triggered no reaction from Helbin, whose cheek rested within her palm while she lied on her bed. Not discouraged, Zaber crawled toward the bed, but, "Who said you could approach?" was again stopped before he could make any meaningful move. Now, he genuinely was startled. Although in recent years Helbin didn't treat him with the same warmth as before, this level of mistreatment was both unprecedented and excessive. Did I offend you? Confused by her actions, he couldn't help but ask. And hearing this, she snorted. Offend me? Do you think I don't know what you did? How dare you bring the waste you call friends to cause trouble within the Wandering Dream Inn? Do you know who it belongs to? Zaber now realized the crux of the matter. Clearly, following his incursion, the Wandering Dream Inn's manager didn't waste time before filing a complaint against him. However, he still failed to grasp the reason for such a strong reaction on Helbin's end. If I didn't adopt a strong stance, wouldn't that be an insult to you? After all, who doesn't know why I headed there? In any case, although that person is surnamed Circer, could a trivial and owner's status within the main house be comparable to yours? He retorted, unable to suppress himself any further. Muddled fool. Before he could understand what occurred, Zaber found himself lying on the ground with a warm slap mark on his right cheek. The Wandering Dream Inn's owner is Hajin Circer, the eldest son, father of the first inheritor, and Lady Guliston's favorite brother. You actually have the gals to run amok within his property? Are you tired of living? Helbin snapped, and her words reverberated within Zaber's ears like a thunderclap. Screwed. He'd screwed himself over and dived onto the road of damnation. Helbin, please save me, he beseeched while kowtowing on the ground. Although she'd only been there on several occasions, Helbin's status within House Circer couldn't be underestimated. Her cultivation resources from beginning to now were arranged by the main house, and she was already accepted by an elder as an unofficial disciple. At this juncture, if anyone could save him, it was her. I can save you, but I cannot save your relatives. Someone must pay for this slight. If not you, it's them. Helbin replied in a cool, almost chilling tone. Faced with either his death or the imminent destruction of his house, Zaber trembled and his eyes widened in disbelief. But I did it for you. Who you did it for, you know better than I do. You have 3 breaths to make your choice. With the ultimatum's descent, Zaber no longer hesitated, and with misty eyes kowtowed. Please save me. Hearing this, from beneath her curtain, disappointment flashed within Helbin's eyes. I already knew how you would choose. Clandire has already been exterminated. The males' heads were delivered to the infernal cult's gate, while the females were shipped as slaves. You can rest easy. As if overwhelmed by a violent seizure, Zaber convulsed with dilated eyes and collapsed on the ground. Escort the prince consort out. Chapter 322, Subduing the Northern Khan Part 1. News soon spread that following Prince Consort Zaber's blunder, several powerful clans found themselves exterminated overnight, with the males beheaded and the females enslaved, all, at the exception of Zaber himself. In a flash, the so-called number 1 Prince Consort accrued tremendous scorn and hatred, going from one of the most distinguished personalities of Telhatra to the son of a bitch on everyone's tongues. Helbin's preceding coming-of-age ceremony and impending consummation night did very little to change that fact. Meanwhile, after some clever bribes, Zamira stood at the royal palace's gates, awaiting the right of entry. Behind her, a slave convoy carrying an abundance of gifts trailed. The 12 Hidden Moon Pavilion members and her tribeswomen stood within the convoy alongside a massive more than 100 slaves she purchased for the occasion. To avoid being exposed too soon, using her divine level speed, Zamira made the trip to foreign khanates to purchase those slaves and had one hidden moon pavilion expert play some mind tricks on them before packing them within a space treasure and returning to the northern khanate. The convoy counted dozens of mesmerizing spirit slaves, all properly dressed for the occasion. A royal servant soon returned, bearing with her Zamira's token and right of entry. If there was one topic on which the barbarian continent was softer than the holy continent, it would be the royal palace's structure. The barbarian khans didn't use eunuchs. The reason was simple: barbarian culture wholly loathed the individuals. Eunuchs were considered worse than slaves, and castration, a punishment worse than death. It was by no means a way to select servants. Instead, they relied solely on women of low status and female slaves to tend to their harems. Of course, in the case of a khanum, female khan, the situation was reversed. Esteemed guest, my superiors reported your arrival to His Majesty, who appeared quite eager to make your acquaintance. He urges us to bring you in. The royal servant declared with a polite bow. The startling gift list had immediately grabbed the attention of the northern Khan, who resolved to form strong ties with that foreign slaver. Although, as the northern Khan, he possessed great wealth every year. A substantial portion of his state revenues fell into the hands of House Circar. Those tributes and offerings submitted in the name of the faith always left a sizable hole within his coffers and prevented him from building a strong enough force to fulfill his long-standing dream: becoming the Khagan, sole ruler of the barbarian secular world. Having done her homework, Zamira was naturally aware of this. "After you," she replied with the same bow before stepping in alongside her convoy. The road from the palace's entrance to the throne room was of more than 10 miles. Therefore, just like within the Jade Dynasty's imperial palace, teleportation circles were the common way to go from a location to another. Through them, Zamira's convoy landed before the throne room in less than 3 minutes. Guards were deployed to carry the coffers, while the slaves followed Zamira into the hall to greet the Khan. Within the spacious hall, a lone man sat on top of an iron throne, and if that was not indication enough, an iron crown also rested on top of his head, clearly marking him as the Northern Khan. Because of their staunch belief that might makes right, barbarian rulers' thrones and crowns were all made of iron. Iron to remind them of the arms they used to take their crowns, and the same iron to remind them of the brutality they should rely on to keep their rule stable. With calm and steady steps, Zamira stopped beneath the stairs and knelt before Agir Selek, the Northern Khan. "Greetings, Your Majesty. May your reign be long and bloody." She hailed using barbarian customs. Within their culture, if a Khan's reign wasn't bloody, it wasn't memorable. With a nod, Agir stood up, revealing his 192 meters tall body clad in luxurious brown fur that failed to cover his powerful musculature. With a glance, Zamira could see Agir was less than 4,000 years old with cultivation, standing at the peak of the cross-tribulation saint rank. With one step, he could achieve star connection. Of course, without proper resources, that step would require a substantial amount of time. But as a hard-working, purple-blooded human, Agir was destined to reach the star-taming stage. Alas, without profound fortuitous encounters, he would never reach the divine rank. Without a word, Agir waved his hand, releasing the pressure of his holy force, which directly slammed into Zamira. Inwardly, she sneered, but to maintain appearances, she teetered and dropped onto the ground, unable to stand up. The cultivation she revealed was merely of the semi-holy rank. Therefore, such a result was natural. However, Agir didn't lose all his vigilance. Still, he waved for the servants and guards to step out. "Greetings. I must say it's not every day I meet a traitor of such beauty. As a matter of fact, you are a first. Apologies for my rudeness. We live in disturbing times. Some probes are necessary. You may rise." Agir replied while dispelling his pressure. "Your Majesty's prudence is the Northern Khanate's good fortune." Zamira replied while standing up. Following her arrival, she'd already spotted more than one Circar spy, individuals with outwardly low, but inwardly profound cultivations who hid within Agir's staff. Their existence confirmed the hypothesis she'd formulated beforehand, and she now believed herself at least 90% correct. Those hidden spies currently pried on the meeting, unaware that the Hidden Moon Pavilion experts silently assailed them with spiritual attacks. In a heartbeat, the spies only saw the mirages they were allowed to. With that handled, Zamira straightened her back, locking a no longer deferential gaze onto Agir whose eyes contorted into a frown. "Who are you?" he directly asked, but no longer doubted he'd invited a wolf into his den. "You don't need to be on your guard. I'm here to tell you a story. It's the story of a mighty lord who from infancy to adulthood cultivated like a madman, striving to always be the best, until that pursuit became a reality. In his teenage days, he made a promise with his childhood sweetheart, pledging to remain celibate until he became the country's #1 expert and took the crown. In return, she vowed to await him. And on the day he vanquished his father and seized the crown, he fulfilled his promise and made her his wife. Together, they had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter would turn out to be the barbarian secular world's #1 talent." Hearing this, Agir's frown grew deeper. But the deeper his frown was, the brighter Zamira's smile became. "This is a rather common story within the Northern Khanate. I wonder why you look so annoyed," she asked in confusion. Fury now shone in Agir's eyes, and his frown turned into a glower. "Allow me to venture a guess. The remainder of the story no one knows of. While he strained himself for his country and strove to remain the best for his wife, the Khan failed to realize that in the nights he reviewed state matters and sat crossed-legged in cultivation, another man filled his wife's bed, going balls deep and creaming her at every turn. And thus, 3 children were made one after the other. Though outstanding, the first 2 were nothing inconceivable. Therefore, they didn't raise the Khan's suspicion. Only when," Zamira pursued, but before she could finish her words, Agir's eyes went bloodshot, and with a snarl, he shot toward her. Shua you up, but without even raising her hand, she suppressed him where he stood, forcing him onto his knees with no means to struggle. Only when the third was born did the Khan realize he'd been duped, betrayed from the start. That child couldn't be his, her existence putting the paternity of the previous 2 into question. And soon, he realized, none were his blood. The Khan is you and Princess Helbin, the child that allowed you to recognize your wife's unfaithfulness. She's not just valued by House Cirker. She is the true Cirker, one of the direct line, and you a cucked Khan. Chapter 323, Subduing the Northern Khan Part 2. As the words echoed within the throne room, Agir's heart teemed with wild tremors, threatening to burst at any moment. However, he restrained the pain and suppressed his rising madness to dagger Zamira with his eyes. Why? Why are you telling me this? Who the hell are you? Agir roared in indignation. I'm your savior, the one that will allow you to wipe out years of shame. Though, I must say you're not really clever. Did you honestly expect a barbarian woman to keep herself chaste for you across more than 1,000 years? Come on. What dream were you living? Zamira replied while shaking her head, causing Agir to almost spit blood. But it's fine. I have the solution to all your woes. You just have to do a few things. First, tell me exactly who it was. Zamira ordered while releasing her star force. And feeling the perfect unity of the stars within that white light, Agir was startled. Star fusion, you're a star-fusing saint, he asked in awe. However, when he recalled who his enemy was, that awe soon vanished, replaced by frustration and a hint of concealed despair. That reaction alone allowed Zamira to eliminate many targets. If a star-fusing saint wasn't enough to kindle hope within Agir's heart, then the one to whom he owed his humiliation was at least divine rank expert. Even within House Cirker, the list wasn't that extensive. The Patriarch, Birkin, and the Elders. The Elders were a heterogeneous group ranging from Birkin's children, siblings, and cousins to his secluded seniors. Perhaps the first inheritor had recently broken through, and reached the divine seed rank, but the timing didn't coincide. Therefore, Zamira ignored him. As for why she cared, it was naturally because of Conrad. After knowing he wished to use the flames of war to lure out valuable Circer experts and gain entry to their headquarters, she'd been devising another plan. And once Princess Helbin's story reached her ears, she quickly connected the dots. Through her and Agir's feud, to say nothing of a valuable member, Zamira was confident they could lure out a core member of House Circer to serve Conrad's purpose. Meanwhile, she could take control of the Northern Khanate without spilling a drop of blood, thus hitting two birds with one stone. I know. It's not that you don't dare seek revenge. You believe doing so is pointless. At best, you would lose your life. At worst, your entire clan would be exterminated, following in the footsteps of the Dire and those other clans who offended those they couldn't afford to. Zamira's words perfectly matched Agir's thoughts, and with his head lowered, he sighed. Indeed, the enemy is too strong. Not only is his own strength monstrous, but his status within the house is at the summit. A man must know when to advance and when to retreat. Regardless of what he does, I cannot take revenge. Agir replied with his teeth sinking into his lower and his nails digging into his palm. As long as we're not dealing with Birkin and Gulistan, I have 100% confidence in giving you justice. You just have to trust me. Hearing this, Agir was startled. How could that woman make such a bold claim? Avoiding Birkin and Gulistan, she seemed to clearly know what she was dealing with, yet still spoke such words. Where did her assurance come from? A mightier backer? Agir simply didn't believe that a saint could go against his enemy. Moreover, why would you help me? What do you want from me? This was the crux of the matter, and until that part was clarified, even if Zamira offered the moon, he would still not dare receive it. Simple. Zamira waved her hand, causing a blood-red-eyed beauty to appear before Agir. The slave clothing she wore vanished, replaced by a daunting, black crystal armor at the back of which 4 pairs of wings fluttered. This red-eyed beauty was naturally one of the 2 paramount knights that followed Conrad on this quest, and now temporarily served under Zamira. Removing her gauntlet, she cut open her palm and stretched out her bleeding hand toward Agir. And feeling the startling aura eruption from her form, Agir was scared witless. Zamira's cultivation awed but couldn't terrify him. However, this woman's was in a whole other league, with depth he couldn't even fathom. Now, he no longer doubted he dealt with an incomparably formidable faction. I want you to drink her blood. Do so, and I will help you obtain your vengeance. Zamira ordered. Several races possessed enthrallment abilities. Mind control and phantasm orchids for incubi, soul worms for paragon spirits, dream compulsion for Maras, etc. This red-eyed beauty was a high-level blood fiend, and thus, her blood possessed the ability to bound whoever tasted it to her will. Using that trick, Zamira could control Agir by proxy, and he knew it very well. However, when the face of that man reappeared within his mind, and he saw the chance of revenge within that bleeding palm, he no longer hesitated. For the sake of revenge, I can give up anything. If there is a chance, I will bet my soul on it. I know you may be tricking me, but I'm still willing to try. Agir exclaimed and drank the blood, thus abandoning his free will. Name? Hajin Circer. Hearing this, Zamira was startled. Although it was now evident Agir's target ranked very high, she didn't expect him to be Hajin himself. After all, Birkin and Gulistan aside, he was House Circer's highest-ranking member, the previous first inheritor, and the current one's father. That being the case, wasn't Princess Helbin Conrad's cousin? Thinking of the things about to occur, Zamira couldn't help but arch her eyebrows. Oh well, we were destined to cross that bridge. Knowing him, I'm sure he will not care. She sighed before returning her attention to her servant by proxy. First, I will give you one of my tribeswomen as your new consort. The children she will bear you will be surnamed Borkson, and in the future, inherit your seat. As for Hajin, since he seems to care so much for that daughter of his, let's make her the bait for luring him out. The aftermath will be straightforward. I believe in the nearby future, you will have the pleasure of seeing him bear witness to his wives and concubines filled to the brim with another man's rod." The words were like music to Agir's ears, and he kowtowed in submission. I yearn for nothing more. Chapter 324, Becoming of Age, Part 1. Under Zamira's lead, the Borkson tribeswomen quickly filled critical positions within the Khan's court, while the Hidden Moon Pavilion's experts took control of Hajin Surker's spy net, first within the royal palace, then throughout Telhatra. The Wandering Dream Inn was no exception. In the span of a few hours, Telhatra fell under the full control of Conrad's group. Meanwhile, Conrad sat cross-legged within a room of the Wandering Dream Inn, with black mist swirling around his form as he deepened his understanding of the blossoming death art and stepped increasingly closer toward the third layer. Else sat before him, pursuing Seer's vision third layer and the perfection of her laws, while Astarte used a pure self to stand guard. Naturally, her true self was also lost in cultivation. But as Conrad tackled new mysteries, a voice echoed within his mind. "Apologies, Master, but I believe it will soon be time for you to act," Zamira said through a mental message stretching across hundreds of miles. The reverberation of the words forced Conrad out of his silent cultivation, and his eyes opened. "Oh, is that so? What ploy do you have in mind?" he asked with a smirk. After giving her free rein, Conrad didn't doubt Zamira would quickly return with results. After all, in terms of mental and planning, she definitely ranked at the helm of the harem. In a contest of plotting, the only one able to stand above her would be Verena and Else. But in those recent years, neither seemed invested in the scheming arts. Not that they had a reason to. "First, following your bloodline seal, may I ask how confident you are in enthralling women through sex?" Zamira inquired in a calm, serious tone. The question didn't startle Conrad, who'd already expected it. "Depends. From mortals to semi-saints, nothing has changed. Of course, I can't just snap my fingers to have them grovel at my feet any longer. But as long as I can lay hands on them, they can't escape." Conrad replied in a clear, confident tone. "What about saints and above? The pleasure won't be enough to override their will. But for saints, I have prepared a few items to make up for that." Hearing this, from within the royal palace, Zamira nodded. "That's more than enough. Master, allow me to congratulate you in advance for obtaining a new beauty. I've gotten a glimpse of Princess Helbin, and I must say, she will definitely suit your tastes and sate your appetite. She has just turned 16, but is already at the peak of the archknight and priest ranks. Her talent is up to standards. The mother is also quite the treat. No wonders Hajin couldn't keep his hands for himself." Initially, Zamira's words triggered a wave of amusement within Conrad's chest. However, when the name Hajin rang, his eyebrows arched. "Hajin? Hajin Surker? The eldest uncle?" "Indeed. He's Princess Helbin's biological father, which also makes her your cousin." Surprise now flashed within Conrad's eyes. Although he too had expected that princess to not be the Khan's blood, he didn't believe the relationship would be this direct. "Why didn't you say that sooner?" he asked, and the indignation coating his words perplexed Zamira, who hadn't anticipated a negative reaction. "I didn't think it would matter. Apologies." "Nonsense. Of course it matters. It makes a world of difference," Conrad exclaimed, and hearing his outrage, Zamira believed she perhaps overestimated his limits and prepared to cancel the plan when, "Had I known that before, I would have directly dived into the royal palace. Joke, one of the last 3 boxes I have yet to check. How could I delay?" Conrad pursued while rising from the bed, causing Zamira to stagger and almost lose her balance. Indeed, she'd not misjudged him. "All right, here's the plan." In the meantime, within the royal palace, festivities abounded. The southern, eastern, and western Khans rushed toward Telhatra with large floating carriages carrying startling gifts. And though, in name, those were congratulatory gifts for the royal family, all knew they were bribes to obtain the princess' favor. At the moment, The four khans gathered in the banquet hall with dozens of seated royal kin and rows of servants that went in and out. At the honor seat, the Agir, the northern Khan, sat with his wife, the Khanum, by his side. True to the rumors, the Khanum's perfectly sculpted hourglass figure radiated with mature charm, while her full, inviting lips captivated the attention of nearby men who could barely contain the urge to kiss them on the spot. And seeing all the male eyes fluttering toward her direction, although she let nothing transpire on her face, the Khanum was quite satisfied. Alas, she wouldn't be able to enjoy this spotlight for long. As the festive bluster boomed, a lithe figure stepped in, her appearance snatching the attention of all the gathered individuals, men and women alike. It was a young, olive-skinned woman who clearly didn't look more than 16 years old. Dressed in a sapphire, backless maxi dress with long, jet-black hairs and piercing, ink-like eyes, she stood out, not because of her riveting beauty, but because of her curves that simply didn't match her youth. Cantaloupe-sized breasts forming a mesmerizing cleavage that threatened to burst out of her dress, a firm, big and perky but that at least fit a 40, and a narrow waist to perfect it all. Even in the royal palace where beauties now gathered, such a striking figure was hard to come by, and when matched with that small, youthful face, gave her a criminal appeal few could resist. She was the Northern Khanate's Princess Helbin, and though her lips flashed an amiable smile, the astute could see that within those young eyes of hers, pure scorn shone. As far as she was concerned, this was no major celebration, but a gathering of monkeys competing for the right to amuse her. In fact, her royal relatives included, she didn't see any of those individuals as sentient beings, but as pets and possessions she could do with as she saw fit. No, they didn't even qualify as pets. None of them did. With a steady gait, Helbin walked toward the honor seat, but bowed toward neither Khan nor Khanum, merely curtsying before taking her seat. The atmosphere went from festive to tense, with the foreign guests not having expected such disrespect. The royal relatives, however, could only put up forced smiles. This merely was the reality of things. What could they do? If it were before, Agir would have flown into a rage. But on this occasion, recalling Zamira's words, his smile only grew brighter. On the contrary, it was his cheating wife that went livid and clenched on her thighs, while her beautiful face became distorted by outrage. Still, what could she do? To Hajin, she was but a toy, a glorified cum-dumpster. Only Helbin genuinely mattered. The celebration carried on, and now that Helbin was present, the servants carried in the dishes and liquor to liven up the banquet hall. But as the banquet approached its end, the Northern Khan stood up with a wine glass raised toward Helbin. What can delight a father more than seeing his daughter become of age? In this world, is there a greater source of bliss? Helbin, it is your birth that allowed me to realize how dark my world really was and awoke me to light. Agir began in a warm, heartfelt tone that filled many with emotions. But hearing this, all except two were startled. Startled because never did they expect such words to leave Agir's lips. The Khanum, his wife, and Helbin, his daughter. Although Agir never revealed it, the Khanum didn't doubt he knew the true parentage of their children. Therefore, the words he now spoke startled her and made her feel that they meant the exact opposite. As for Helbin, their father-daughter relationship was a clusterfuck to begin with. In 16 years of existence, Agir didn't hug her once. How could she not be startled? Ignoring their stupor, he carried on. The coming-of-age ceremony's proper end is the consummation night. I know the Circers have already prepared many outstanding talents to serve you. However, I also tried my hardest to bring you the best. Clap, clap. Following Agir's two loud claps, the royal guards brought in 6 men in chains. The upper halves of their bodies were bared for all to see, revealing their powerful musculature. However, though the first 5 all were breathtakingly handsome, it is on the 6th that Helbin's eyes locked. Breathtaking was not enough to describe that 6th man who towered above the rest both in size and musculature, standing at more than 1. 9 meters with back-length jade-colored hairs and enrapturing golden eyes, both in face and figure. He appeared like a fantasy of Empyrean perfection. Too good to be true. The young man's eyes locked on Helbin's, and his lips curled into a smile. In that instant, she knew she wanted him. Chapter 325, Becoming of Age Part 2. Naturally, Helbin wasn't the only victim of that youth's charms. Men and women alike ignored the remaining fire slaves to glue their eyes on him. The females stared in a blissful stupor while insecurity and flaming ire flooded the males' hearts. And since Conrad had appeared, how could it not? With his transcendental looks, even without his orchid scent, regardless of where he went, becoming the center of attention was inevitable. Now, even the Khanum's eyes were threatening to pop out of their sockets to fly into his cradle. "Where did you obtain such specimens?" the Khanum asked Agir, unable to contain her blazing curiosity while devising ways to snatch this youth away from her daughter. Witnessing the reaction Conrad triggered, Agir was awash with satisfaction. Indeed, Zamira hadn't swindled him. This youth was a lethal weapon few could resist. His presence, a craving, and his touch of irresistible appeal. Clearly, Conrad hailed from the Holy Continent. In an era where new Holy Continent slaves were vanishing commodities, seeing such a youth appear out of nowhere should have prompted many inquiries. But smitten by his appearance, none took that point into consideration. "They are the result of my desperate searches to please my beloved daughter. Of the 6, 5 are high-level semi-saints. As for the 6th, while he's merely mortal, his worth speaks for itself. Naturally, all are masters of the bedchamber arts. Helbin, feel free to enjoy them. This is Father's farewell gift for you." Agir proclaimed with soaring emotions. Following her coming-of-age ceremony, Helbin was meant to return to the main house for cultivation and not step out before an incalculable amount of time. Therefore, none found his words inappropriate. Without a word, Helbin stood up, holding up her trailing dress to step toward the slaves. As she moved, her tight fitting wear perfectly highlighted her swaying curves, and the wiggle of her hips pulled the male's attention away from Conrad, if only for a moment. Bypassing the first 5 slaves, she stopped before the focus of her attention and stretched her silky palm toward his cheek, letting her nimble fingers trace it before seizing his chin in an unabashed move that startled more than one. Although barbarians didn't have much protocol, such a display still was unexpected. After all, she was but an inexperienced 16 years old. Evidently, they'd underestimated Helbin's self-confidence. With more than a decade of seeing the world grovel at her feet, she'd long since become convinced that throughout the barbarian continent's secular world, there was nothing she couldn't do. In the meantime, her prince consort, Zaber, who sat nearby, trembled in suppressed shame and indignation. Although he knew such a day was predestined, knowing was one thing and facing another. As Helbin's hand trailed the impassible Conrad's cheeks, chin, and neck, his heart teemed with jealousy, rancor, and humiliation. "I only want him," Helbin declared, while never raising her eyes from Conrad. If before, the notion of letting go of 5 high-level semi-saint dual cauldrons for one mortal would have made those barbarian tycoons burst in laughter, today, the word's echo took no one aback. Almost palpable jealousy swirled within the air, expending nostrils and causing teeth to sink into frustrated lips. Agir could barely contain his joy. "Very well, as you wish. This is your day, feel free to do as you see fit." Agir replied before lowering his wine glass to return to his seat. Meanwhile, Conrad shouldered Helbin's gaze, teasing her with subtle eye movements and silent flirting. Without a hint of bashfulness, she pulled him by the hand, and under the dumbfounded gazes of the gathering, led him out of the banquet hall to head into her consummation chamber. Zaber felt the iron taste of blood fill his lips. Originally, although he wasn't going to be the only one, at least, he would have been part of Helbin's night. But now, This obviously no longer was part of the plan. Staggering on his seat, his eyes went bloodshot, and he slid onto the ground, tumbling like a fool. But his looks of scorn and mockery trapped him from all sides. Little did he know that if not for Conrad's appearance, this would have been his final night as a cultivator. As they departed from the banquet hall, Helbin's slow, steady steps hastened, growing increasingly hurried until she found herself sprinting toward the consummation chambers. Her pulse quickened, and though he remained silent, Conrad could feel her temperature rising, if only a little. In the span of a few minutes, they reached the consummation chambers where Helbin's bodyguards stood vigil. "Have them all get lost?" she ordered the guards while staring at the chamber's door. Behind it, several Circer-selected men of solid cultivation and well-carved looks knelt beneath a large bed to welcome and serve her. Unlike the royal palace's majority, they knew very well that past tonight, all their cultivation would be harvested. However, they didn't care. They'd been specially groomed for this day, and their cultivation bases meant to fuel Helbin's. But little did they expect that as soon as she arrived, her first words would be to dismiss them all. "My lady, isn't this improper?" From the pills they ate to the methods they practiced, Lord Hajin especially selected and had these men trained for you. "Not harvesting them, aren't you disrespecting him? Please reconsider." The guard captain interfered. Although he never presented herself to her, Hajan Circer had always been Helbin's most active patron, and her cultivation road arranged by him either directly or by proxy. Even the Circer elder that took her as an unofficial disciple obeyed his orders. Needless to say, Helbin held him in high esteem and saw him as the father she never had. However, on this occasion, disobeying was a must. "In the future, I can harvest them. Tomorrow, in a week or a month, it doesn't matter. But tonight, I only want him," she declared, not leaving room for compromise. Hearing this, the guard captain was startled, and his eyes rose to lock on Conrad. As a peak stage cross-tribulation saint of House Circer, although, in the main house, he could only serve as guard or butler for the most powerful lines, within the secular world, not many could hold his attention. Therefore, he didn't spare Conrad a glance, taking him as his lady's chosen toy. But when his eyes locked upon him, they widened in disbelief. No wonders the young lady was being this intransigent. Knowing that nothing could change her mind, he shook his head, motioning for his subordinates to clean the room, which they did in the blink of an eye. Unlike many others, he knew of Helbin's real status. Therefore, when push came to shove, he didn't dare stand in her way. Without further disturbance, Helbin pulled Conrad in. Amused by her display, he could barely restrain the chuckle on his lips. But to avoid foiling the night, he snuffed it out, only maintaining that ensnaring smile that so easily captivated her. With 5 nimble steps, Helbin reached the spacious oval bed draped in red sheets, then spun to face Conrad. Desire flared within her eyes, desire she didn't constrain as she rushed into his chest and seized him by the cheeks to pull him into a rough, ardent kiss. Their tongues intertwined, meshing in moist passion as Helbin stood on her toes to make up for the 15 centimeters difference between them. The union of their lips set her flaming body ablaze, and it didn't take 2 minutes before she pushed Conrad back and with a wave of her hand, shattered his chains. "I wanted to do this since I laid eyes on you," she boldly claimed while the clang of the dropping chains rang within the room. "I know," Conrad replied in such confident a tone that for an instant, Helbin arched her eyebrows. Quickly, however, her surprise made place for a resplendent smile, and she recoiled toward the bed, sitting on top of it while extending her foot toward Conrad. "In that case, please take responsibility." Chapter 326, Becoming of Age Part 3. Such words, Conrad needn't hear twice. In 3 steps, he stopped before Helbin and knelt in front of her perfect leg to lower her shoes before taking her foot into his palm and giving it a gentle kiss. But little did she know that the moment that foot of hers landed into his hands marked the end of her existence as a free being. Conrad's fingers played with the toes, massaging them with masterful care and relaxing Helbin's body without losing her heat. Ah! She exhaled a low sigh of contentment before lowering her back on the bed. Taking this opportunity, Conrad activated his ecstasy fingers. Small, nigh imperceptible pink flames sprang from the tip of his 10 fingers to turn this casual massage into Helbin's pitfall. As Conrad exerted pressure on her toes and foot, the pink flames dived past her pores to invade her body and not only heighten her lust and sensitivity, but turn her foot into a cluster of erogenous zones. Now, even the most casual of brushes would send a jolt of electricity to race throughout her body. Ah! A low groan escaped her lips as she stretched her arms on the bed and relished in Conrad's touch. His attention shifted toward the left foot, administrating the same treatment before returning to the right, and going back and forth while making his way up the beauty's ankles to reach her legs. As Conrad's hands rose, so did Helbin's dress, and by the time he climbed past her knees, her shapely thighs and legs were in full view. Naturally, wherever Conrad's hands went, his touch of ecstasy created pleasure jolts and new erogenous zones. Inexplicable pleasure flooded Helbin's mind. If boldness was one thing, experience was another. And experience she didn't have. Hence, those new pleasure waves made her unable to question how a mortal could put her in such a state with the fiddling of 10 fingers. Ea! A louder groan echoed as Conrad's hands reached Helbin's inner thighs and massaged them with his otherworldly ecstasy fingers while pushing up her dress to reveal those moist panties of hers. The thin black lace failed to contain the dripping liquid that now trickled down the bed and soaked it unbeknown to Helbin, whose mind entered a dazed state. Slipping his hands beneath Helbin's panties, Conrad caressed her twat, then spread it from beneath her underwear, making the fabric sink into her dripping cunt and shake her with another wave of carnal bliss. The pitch of her moans reached another level. Letting go of Helbin's cunt, Conrad grabbed and yanked her panties upward, rubbing the fabric against her snatch in a rough, brisk move while groping her supplest cheek with his free hand. Ah! The friction caused by the rubbing and groping sent Helbin over the edge, and as Conrad pulled harder on her lace, she quivered on the bed with her legs spread and her juice gushing forth in her first orgasm. Ooh! She groaned in loud delight. Conrad's last yank proved too hard for the abused panties, and they broke free from Helbin's waist to hang within their tormentor's hands. In slow, tantalizing motion, Conrad climbed over the bed to lie above Helbin, trapping her between his arms before waving her drenched underwear at her glazed eyes. What a mess! He whispered in her ear before trailing his tongue across her earlobes. Tossing the broken piece of fabric aside, Conrad extended his hands toward Helbin's massive breasts, allowing them to burst free by lowering her dress all the way down her waist, thus not only revealing the perfectly shaped, cantaloupe-sized breasts but her trimmed abs and narrow waist. Meanwhile, Helbin panted against his torso, striving to awake from the spell he put her under. Little cousin, even without powers, lovely lambs like you, I can play to my heart's content, Conrad whispered while planting hickeys on Helbin's neckline. Little couse dash, she began, but before she could finish her words, Conrad sealed her lips with his, keeping her pinned with an overbearing kiss while his nimble fingers fondled her massive breasts and teased her nipples. The meaning of the words no longer seemed important. Helbin's eyes glazed with lust, and she abandoned her seething body to Conrad's hands. "MHM," she moaned, muffled by his gripping lips as he inserted his finger into her snatch and located her pleasure spots after but a brief moment of exploration. The fingering then began, with Conrad not only attacking the pleasure spots but using his ecstasy fingers to create new ones, all while sucking on Helbin's tongue. MHHHHHHM. As Conrad played with Helbin's supple body, one orgasm after another followed, and even his lips couldn't wholly silence the loud moans bursting from her throat. Breaking the kiss, he pulled his lips away from hers, leaving a long saliva trail as he did, and allowing her to release all the moans he suppressed. Ea, aha! More? The tingling won't stop. I want more. Give me more. She roared, causing Conrad's lips to curve into a devilish smile. As you command, little cousin, Conrad replied and unbuckled his pants to release his erect meat rod around which golden light now whirled. With his right thigh, he pushed Helbin's left leg to the side, while lifting her right leg within his hand to give himself better access. He then aligned his scalding shaft with Helbin's twat, and even before it broke into her, she could feel its consuming heat. Conrad's eyes locked onto Helbin's, holding her in his thrall as he pushed against her entrance in a slow, yet sharp thrust that broke through her hymen. Ah! A sharp moan echoed, but before Helbin could suffer the pain of her lost maidenhood, golden light spread within her garden, filling her with nigh-debilitating bliss and an insatiable craving for more. Now, let me plow you, Conrad demanded while his hefty rod butted against Helbin's cervix. Plow me, she acquiesced, and with a fiendish grin, he pulled himself down to the entrance, his cock contending with the friction of Helbin's gripping pussy as he went, until it almost popped out of this wonderful field. But before it did, Conrad slammed himself back inside, marking the beginning of slow, measured thrusts that matched the expert dancing of his hips against his new conquest. Lost in tantalizing ecstasy, Helbin kissed his face, neck, and chest, while clinging hard onto him with her gripping snatch. Once used to her insides, Conrad's pace shot up in an unrestrained pounding session. In loud squelching sounds, his hips hammered hers, and his balls slapped those large juicy-ass cheeks that pressed the drenched bed below. When Helbin believed Conrad's pounding speed had reached its limit, he would slam her harder, harder, and even harder, plowing her with reckless abandon as she clutched his back in euphoric desperation. See you coming. She groaned in a throaty climax that alarmed more than one throughout the royal palace. Her legs spread wide, and her toes curled up. Still, Conrad didn't stop, relentlessly pounding her until his sweat meshed with hers, and he finally released his load deep down her snatch. Oh! Conrad groaned in delight. But with such a young knight, how could he possibly stop here? Although, as a mortal, he could no longer go on for days, a few more hours were perfectly within his cords. Hence, Helbin's consummation night carried on. News of the ongoing barbaric mating went from an ear to another, spreading throughout the royal palace, and causing poor Zaber to not know where to hide himself. Chapter 327. When you're so dreadful that you don't even need to speak. That night, a peak stage, star-connecting saint from House Circer arrived to deliver Helbin's adoption bill and bestow the Circer surname upon her. But never did he expect that throughout hours of patient waiting, only Helbin's throaty moans would echo within his ears. How many are there inside? The low-ranking infernal protector couldn't help but ask. Although the Circers were a dual cultivator household, never did he hear of such a thundering consummation night. It was as if Helbin was abandoning herself to the devil's yoke while beseeching him for rougher oppression. Were it not for the squelching sounds booming alongside the groans, that protector would not have been able to restrain himself, and dived in to make sure the young lady wasn't being tortured on a wooden horse or in a brazen bull. Fortunately, those sounds were there to remind him that this was nothing more than one hell of a barbaric mating session. For the sake of all that is unholy, how many people are inside? Could you guys not understand proper limitations and allow the young lady to indulge in more than she could bear? If she suffers some irreversible damage, how are you going to answer to the eldest lord? The old Circer protector snapped, unable to endure this further. Hearing this, the guards released helpless, simultaneously sighs. Only one. There is only one man inside. The guard captain replied with his head lowered, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The protector didn't lie. The things he heard this night had reached a frightening level, and he truly feared Helbin would not come out the same. And thinking of how he didn't put up much resistance before, regret welled up within his chest. Never should he have allowed her to get her way. Alas, beneath the heavens and above the earth, Regret was the most helpless creature. The third hour ended, and with it, so did Helbin's squeals. A sudden, deathly silence descended upon the night, startling the guards and protector who stood before the consummation chamber's door. Is it finally over? They all wondered. And as if to answer them, the door opened, revealing the silhouette of a sweaty, half-naked youth with back-length jade-colored hairs and bright golden eyes. The guard's eyes looked past him to lock on Helbin, who laid on the bed with her eyes rolled back, her legs spread, and cum dripping from her cunt, lips, and rear while a silly smile curved her lips. Faced with such a startling scene, their eyes widened in disbelief. But when recalling all that occurred beforehand, they felt this result natural. Still, knowing was one thing, but accepting another. Bold mortal ant, how dare you treat our young lady in this way? Do you know her status? Or did you think that her favor allows you to run amok? Today, if I don't teach you a lesson, how can I answer the eldest lord? The guard captain snarled while balling up his fists, ready to give Conrad the beating of a lifetime. However, when the protector's eyes locked on him, confusion flashed within. Strange, where have I seen this be dash? He wondered. But before his words could reach their end, his eyes widened in a stupor. No, they widened in fright. I'm impossible. How could it be him? No, it can't be. It must be because of that drug I took 2 days ago. I really need to stop those things, yeah? The old protector rationalized while slapping himself to dispel the illusion before his eyes. The slapping sounds took the guards by surprise, and they turned perplexed looks at the protector who now cared very little for how they viewed his move. Sir, is something the matter? Why are you slapping yourself? The guard captain asked, confused by such a sudden, odd move. A pity that with his status and time spent in the secular world, he hadn't been exposed to Conrad's face. Had he been privy to his real appearance, then just like this protector, he would be slapping himself. Ignoring the guard captain, the protector returned his eyes back onto Conrad, and when the exact same face appeared in his sight, cold sweat erupted from his forehead to drench the entirety of his face. This is not a hallucination? Shit, oh shit, I'm so done for. The protector stammered, and at the surprise of the guards, dropped on his knees and kowtowed. Greetings, young master. I, your servant, didn't expect to meet you in such a place. Young master, I beseech you to be merciful and spare my life. The old protector wailed while reiterating his kowtow. Like most of the Circer kinsmen at the star-taming stage or above, he knew of Conrad's 2 identities, the first being the Holy Continent's God-Sovereign, and the second being Lady Gulistan and the Southern King of Hell's Sun. According to past arrangements, now that he'd risen, by right, he should have become the new patriarch. However, the relationship between mother and son was a notorious clusterfuck. Worse, his own reputation was that of an infamous devil who slaughtered en masse and at will. It didn't take a genius to figure out that his appearance within Helbin's chambers heralded a dastardly plot. And having been exposed to it, this old protector realized that if he didn't surrender and beg for mercy, his head was likely to fall here and now. But as he kowtowed and beseeched salvation, to say nothing of the guards, even Conrad was alarmed. Is my reputation really that terrible? Otherwise, how could he so quickly drop on his knees? Conrad wondered in a silent stupor. Clearly, you've not been a witness to the things you've done in the past. The Holy Continent's denizens may see you as God, but in the barbarian continent, I'm afraid it is your name that keeps children awake at night. Celine scoffed. At that time, in a twister of white light, Zamira appeared. Master, I believe we have all the bait and can now lure out a big fish, she declared with a bow. What the hell are you guys talking of dash? The guard captain began, but before he could finish his words, he choked on his tongue and passed out. A second afterward, his subordinates followed him onto the ground. Seeing this, the old protector kowtowed harder. In those last 10 years, no one knows the exact depth of how Circer's gains, and much stronger the core players are when compared to the past. With his number 3 position, Aegean's strength is difficult to estimate. That is why I rather rely on some protectors to gain entry. Conrad explained with his arms crossed beneath his back. Never would he believe that the Circer offered 1 billion lives in sacrifice to the Merit Steel, just for the sake of one barrier. Without a shred of doubt, the high level received many boons and used that time to grow further. I naturally understand that principle. However, I fear we're diving, unprepared into the wolf den. Just like you've mentioned, no one knows what awaits inside, or if we can truly avoid detection. But if we can lay hands on a core member, all those questions will be explained. Moreover, I believe that in the case of doubt, Aegean will not rashly show himself. Therefore, it is not him we will use to gain entry. Zamira replied, "Have it your way. Tomorrow morning, I will depart for the Blood Mountain Range. The 2 paramount knights aside, the Hidden Moon Pavilion's experts are in your hands." Conrad declared and was about to depart when suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks while his face contorted in a deep frown. "What's wrong?" Zamira inquired, confused by this sudden change of expression. "Nothing we can solve." Having never heard such words from Conrad's lips, Zamira was startled. However, he gave her no time to probe further and departed for his next chambers. Chapter 328 Tree Sovereign. Back in his chambers, Conrad waved his right hand, summoning his 2 female paramount knights who immediately dropped on their knees. "Master, what can we do for you?" they asked with deference. Conrad first said nothing, waving his hands to summon a grand golden gate that hovered before the 2. At the same time, his imperial jade seal and a golden bow appeared and floated toward the 2. The golden bow was the heavenly star bow Conrad swindled from Anatole's hands, refined and brought to a higher level. Hence, he renamed it as Sun Shooter. "This gate will lead you to the Empress and Jade Consort. Equipped of those 2 artifacts, assist them in their tasks," he ordered without looking back. Hearing this, the 2 knight ladies were startled, and with Conrad's symbol of imperial authority standing before them, how could they not? However, "Master, in your current condition, we can't leave your side." They immediately refused. But hearing this, Conrad flew into a rage. "Since when do my imperial commands require your approval? Act with haste," he snarled, making the 2 realize the situation didn't authorize delays. With helpless nods, they stood up and stepped into the gate to reach Yvonne and Verina's side. In the instant they left, Conrad lowered his eyes onto his open right palm, then clenched it to the limits of his physical strength. And were it not for his boundless death essence making his body nigh indestructible, his nails would have dug blood. The plan must move faster. To understand the root of Conrad's sudden change, we need to go back to the moment the Serpent Tribe's chieftain led Yvonne and Verina toward the hidden forest's secret location, the ancestral blood pool. Standing at the intersection of the 5 tribes, the ancestral blood pool was a shared treasure among them all, a delicacy they could only worship and stare at, but never utilize. The reason was simple: incompetence. An ancient treasure predating the founding of the tribes, the ancestral blood pool hailed back to a time when demonic beasts and fiends of various tribes stood in harmony under the banner of one creature, the Tree Sovereign. The Tree Sovereign was the ancient crystal world's first cultivator, a nature spirit born from the roots of the world tree. If Paragon, Dream, Moon, and Sun spirits belonged to the true spirits, then nature spirits were a step above them all. In the higher realms, they were known as the Great Spirits. A nature spirit could only emerge from nature itself, and their bloodlines never passed down. In the case of mating, the child would inherit 100% of their partner's lineage. For that reason, only a scant few existed within the 3 realms. The Tree Sovereign was born in ancient times, predating Taratha's birth. Born with astonishing cultivation and a preternatural understanding of all things within heaven and earth, he soon became the leader of all those demonic beasts and fiends, leading them into an era of harmony. However, because he didn't allow anyone to worship him, trapped under the mortal realm's laws, he could never ascend to godhood. In mortal realms, when cultivators reached the limit of the divine road but failed to master their world's faith, they could take another path and become demigods. In terms of strength, there was no difference between the average demigod and the average higher realm minor god devoid of faith power. However, demigods didn't possess an unlimited lifespan and could not live for more than 1,000,000 years. Moreover, every 129,600 years, they suffered a cosmic tribulation, which ensured they would never enjoy their full lifespan. The average demigod could not survive the first. Of course, there were some upsides. The demigod rank was a boundless pool. Those at that level could carry on with their cultivation as they pleased, and if one day they rose to the upper realms, they would immediately break through to higher levels, becoming minor gods, true gods, or more, depending on the requirements they fit. Having survived one cosmic tribulation, the tree sovereign was as powerful as a true god. Alas, a true god, he wasn't. And the next cosmic tribulation didn't fail to harvest his life. Following his death, his 5 consorts struggled to keep the tribes united. Chapter 329, Black Crystal Ring. At first, it merely was scalding heat. But by the time half her body sank into the ancestral blood pool, Yvonne could feel her bones, veins, and internal organs seared by the massive god force within the ancestral blood pond. With her teeth clenched and her eyes shut close, she stepped deeper into it while advancing toward the middle. There, she stopped and let herself fully drop into the ancestral blood pond. But soon, she realized that even sinking lower didn't come without a price. The farther in she went, the more pressure she faced. And although there only was 100 meters of depth, she couldn't go lower than 5. But even there, mightier, searing pain invaded her body. It was as if she'd been thrown into an erupting volcano that scorched everything but that last spark of life, allowing her to feel all without ever being granted the grace of death. To say nothing of 7 days and 7 nights. At this rate, it would be a miracle if she could endure 3. However, the word retreat never crossed her mind. With her teeth gritted, she stretched out her hand, summoning a rose gold ring encrusted with a spellbinding black crystal. Black crystal was a unique material Conrad first discovered within the tower, through the infernal and celestial founders' inheritances. As one of the key ingredients of the Hidden Moon Pavilion's 4-winged black crystal armors, it naturally was extraordinary. On top of its heaven-defying durability, black crystal possessed one unique ability. It could store anything. As she held that ring within her hand, Yvonne still recalled the day Conrad bestowed it upon her. "Beloved Empress, now that our reign begins, allow me to give you this," Conrad declared while extending a small ring box toward Yvonne, who took it with a hint of curiosity. Opening the box, her eyes dropped on a rose gold ring, but focused on the black crystal encrusted within. Within that ring, she could feel boundless, slumbering power. Such strong a force that if recklessly unleashed, it could blow the entire ancient crystal world into smithereens. Her eyes shone with a stupor, then rose to lock on Conrad's. "How did you?" she began. But before she could finish her words, Conrad answered the question trotting on her lips. "The rose gold is just a convenient exterior. I forged this ring from several unique materials, including my world devourer blood. Moreover, it's soaked in my blood origin for 7 days." Conrad explained, and his words caused Yvonne's eyes to widen in fright. The blood origin was the most vital part of a cultivator's lineage. Who dared mess with it? But never did she expect that Conrad's following words would astound her even further. But that's not the most critical part. What truly makes this ring astonishing is the peak stage minor god's soul I refined and trapped within the black crystal. It now serves as the nucleus for the ring, giving it vast, inconceivable power. If one day you face a helpless situation, regardless of how dreadful, I believe this ring will solve the problem for you. Throughout this ancient crystal world, there shouldn't be anything it can't tackle. However, Do recall that the incubus god's soul acts as fuel, which makes the ring a consumable item. According to my estimations, you only have 5 full power shots. As Conrad's words ended, Yvonne sighed and shook her head. This is too great a show of favoritism. You are my wife and empress. If I don't favor you, who do I favor? Yvonne, open your ears and listen well. I'm biased toward you. What can you do? Conrad chortled while enclosing the ring within Yvonne's palm. Hearing this, a mild chuckle escaped her lips. With such words, how can I refuse? I will keep it with me but out of plain view, to avoid sending the harem into an uproar. As you please. While she recalled that day, a wave of warmth soothed Yvonne's chest, and her eyes shone with greater determination. Without hesitation, she placed the ring on her finger. A vast devouring force kicked into gear, siphoning a vast majority of the true god-level pressure and alleviating the burden on Yvonne's body. Although the scalding blood baptism was unavoidable for success, at least, she no longer had to exert strength to contend with that boundless pressure. Balling up to hold her knees, Yvonne silently endured the blood baptism, quivering as the inferno it unleashed consumed her from the inside. Meanwhile, Verena stood vigil on the outside, observing it all with complex emotions. Like that, one day passed, and still, Yvonne persevered. But as the first day reached its end, from within the shadows of the hidden forest, 5 vast pressures erupted to lock on Verena and the ancestral blood pond behind her. Her eyes contorted into a frown. Immediately, she activated her origin sight to cover the perimeter, fast enough to see 6 dark green beams emerge from the shadows and shoot toward her. The dark green beams tore through her form, or rather, the afterimage she left behind as she soared into the sky to avoid the blow. 6 short, pear-shaped women with dark green eyes then emerged to surround her from all sides. Each boasted an early-stage divine ascension cultivation base and powerful physiques. Naturally, they were Zenith Ant Elders. Verena's frown deepened. Not good. Oh well, since I could sense them, it means they didn't come with withering leaves. At the very least, I don't have to worry about those. She consoled herself before desperate odds while raising a force field to prevent the Ant Elders from reaching Yvonne. Although they would not dare step inside the pool, Verena didn't doubt that to attack and injure Yvonne, they didn't have to. Therefore, regardless of the cost, she couldn't allow them to pass. With you alone, how do you plan to stop us? If you know proper limitations, get lost now, and we will allow you to keep your life. The leading Ant Elder proclaimed with a fiendish grin. But as the words echoed, Verena sneered. You're not qualified to control my life, she declared. Following her words, golden light erupted from her body to morph into a golden armor at the back of which 5 pairs of wings fluttered. Stretching out her hand, Verena summoned a long golden sword whose aura stood in perfect harmony with her armor and swept the 6 Ant Elders with her magenta gaze. I heard cricket meat was a delicacy. Please don't blame me for wanting to sample it. Chapter 330 I Am a Trickster. Verena's words caused the grinning Ant Elders' faces to twist into scowls. Overestimating oneself? They replied like a choir before stretching out their hands to each summon Nihility Flail, their lineage weapon. Vast, dark green demonic energy erupted alongside soaring rocks as the pitch-black flail was willed from their bloodline and descended into their hands. Armed with it, their strength skyrocketed. Still, Verena didn't flinch. Turning into dark green beams, the 6 Zenith Ant Elders shot toward Verena, hurling their flails at her unprotected eyes and neck. Not moving from an inch, she raised her golden sword. Ancestral glory, citadel of dreams, she exclaimed and released a magenta fog from which rose 3 gargantuan citadels, each releasing a soothing, enchanting melody as if the choir of a celestial host descended from heaven's vault to enlighten the mortal world. The 3 citadels opened their gates, unleashing vast celestial armies that barreled into the 6 incoming Ant Elders. But even before such a startling armada, they remained wholly unafraid. Zenith! They roared with fiendish glee. Instantaneously, the pressure rippling from them skyrocketed in intensity, propelling their might to new heights while suppressing Verena's celestial host with the weight of mountains. Altogether, the Zenith Ant Elders aimed their nihility flails at the ground, causing massive boulders and rock pillars to rise from beneath the ground to slam into Verena's illusory army. Overwhelmed by their combined might, the celestial host collapsed, but even as it did, Verena turned into a beam of golden light to slam into the leftward Ant Elder with a piercing sword strike. "Foolish!" the Ant Elders exclaimed while shifting their formation to surround her. And by the time Verena's sword reached their sister's neck, their flails were raining upon her skull, neck, and face in a flurry of blows. However, as the blows approached, Verena's lips curved into a resplendent smile. Golden light flashed around her head, covering head and neck in a dazzling golden helmet that repelled the flurry of blows. And as the 5 elders flew backward, Verena's sword slammed into her target's neck, causing a metallic clang to echo. Bright golden light then erupted from her sword, and it pierced through its target like a knife through butter. The Ant Elder's green blood erupted from both her throat and lips. Verena then spun on 180 degrees, beheading the Ant Elder with a circular swing. With her free left hand, she slammed a golden light-infused punch into the soaring head, smashing it into smithereens and destroying both body and soul. Unlike saints, sages' souls possessed their own independence and could survive without a body. Worse, at divine ascension, as long as the soul remained. Although the process was far from instantaneous, the body could reconstruct itself. Therefore, in battles of that level, blows that obliterated the soul were of paramount importance. Having not expected such a sudden turn, the remaining 5 Ant Elders were startled. But before they could voice their complaints, Verena pursued. The 5 pairs of wings at her back glittered, endowing her with speed transcending that of light itself. Zenith! The 5 Ant Elders roared in tandem, locking the might of their bloodline on Verena and crushing her with the weight of an invisible mountain. Under the suppression of 5 Zenith, her speed shrunk to less than 10% of what it previously was. But still, she charged, attempting to force through the suppression to hack her golden sword at her foes. Relentless grit shone on her face as she charged, but the violent, forceful move caused her to spit a large mouthful of blood and tumble toward the ground. "Hateful creature, surrender your life." The Ant Elders snarled while vanishing to reappear above Verena's tumbling form. But as their flails flew toward her exposed back, the helpless grit and determination on her face made way for another bright smile, and as if suddenly refilled with her full strength, she turned into golden light particles and bypassed their blows to reform above them. But now, not 1, but 5 Verenas stood, and all hacked at one of the 5 Ant Elders. True demon form. They snarled in desperation, causing massive demonic energies to erupt from their forms as they turned into 5-1. 65 meters tall praying mantises. Clang. In one, resounding metallic sounds, Verena's 5 simultaneous blows sent the 5 Ant Elders crash into the ground. And in a vast eruption of dust, they cratered. Despicable trickster. They roared in indignation. In usual days, it was always them playing tricks on others. When had they ever been swindled in such a shameful way? And not just once but twice. In a flash, they felt as if those millennia of cultivation were spent in vain. Hearing their grievances, Verena burst into laughter. "My strength cannot compare to Yvonne's, and my talent is a step below Elsa's. Were it not for my ability to bring resources to their full potential, how could I possibly suppress those little Valkyries shooting for my seat? I am a trickster, a riveting schemer. What can you do?" She chortled while aiming her golden sword at the 5 mantis demons below her. Valkyrie judgment. Verena's entire armor and weapon turned into golden lightning. But at the tip of her sword, The blinding golden lightning coalesced into a humongous energy ball that exploded in a bright golden lightning beam that barreled into the 5 ant elders. "Resist with your full arse dash," the leading ant elder began, but only then did she realize that as the golden lightning beam descended, she couldn't move an inch. The words. She realized too late. Indeed, as the creators of both dream spirits and mermaids, Maras all possessed the ability to seamlessly bewitch and entrap body and soul through their voice. And from the start of their collision, Verena did just that, using the fight, their soaring anger, and overall lack of preparation as a distraction to prevent them from figuring her out. Farewell? Boom. In a thundering explosion of sparkling light, the golden lightning beam slammed into the 5 ant elders, turning them into a charred mess. However, although Verena aimed for their lives, with their powerful physiques and demonic form, they still stood. Not giving them a chance to make a comeback, Verena turned into a light beam to shoot toward them, aiming to behead them all. But as her sword approached, the sky darkened under a gathering of dark green clouds, and from them, a dark green palm descended to slam into Verena. Averting her move, she spun to face the blow with her full might. Bang! Verena flew backward with stinging internal organs and a large blood spurt. Still, she managed to receive the blow. But as her magenta eyes locked on the figure appearing within the sky, her lips curved into a forced smile. Well, this isn't good. Chapter 331 11th Queen. Beneath the dark green sky, the lithe, pear-shaped figure of a 1.6 meters tall woman appeared. If her shoulder-length, curly black hairs didn't give any insight into her lineage, then her dark green eyes that mixed tranquility and treachery clearly did. Another zenith ant, but this time, feeling the horrendous pressure that crashed upon her and pursued that of the mighty Dasra, Verena didn't doubt she was dealing with an existence ranking above all those ant elders. And indeed, as soon as the woman appeared, the 5 ant elders tapped into their full reserves to drag their maimed body into the sky and bow toward her. "Greetings, 11th Queen." They hailed in deference while kneeling within the sky. With a casual wave of her hand, the Ant Queen backhanded them all across the cheek, sending their mantis forms spiraling into the air with gushing blood. Still, her eyes remained locked on Verena, who stood before the protective barrier she'd erected for Yvonne. Utter and complete wastes. If only one of them is enough to vanquish you, tell me, as colony elders, what purpose do you serve? The 11th Queen rhetorically asked, with her eyes still locked on Verena. No, now. Her eyes looked beyond the barrier to assess the blood pool it protected. For indeed, that pool was the reason for her arrival. Apologies, 11th Majesty. That woman was craftier than we expected. Were it not for her tricks, One of the ant elders began in indignation. But as laid out justifications, a strange glint flashed within the 11th Queen's eyes. That simple sound threw the 5 elders into disarray, and they immediately bowed in submission. We have no excuse. That's better. Later on, I shall administrate your punishments. The 11th Queen replied before again, waving her hand. Emerald-colored light waves emerged to wrap the 5 elders, mending all their wounds and returning them to peak strength in a heartbeat. Verena was startled. Could that be life essence? In a sense, life essence was present within all living creatures within heaven and earth. From the tiniest of flowers to the mightiest of cultivators, they all possessed it in various quantities. However, none could control it. Life essence was also the source of life fruit's extraordinary physique nourishing abilities. On the ancient crystal world, the world tree aside, none could control life essence. But now, it appeared that siphoning the world tree's roots allowed the ant queens to obtain a portion of that ability. Worse, even with her origin sight, Verena couldn't see through the ant queen's abilities. Without delay, she activated her seer's vision, using it to peer into the 11th Queen's true abilities, and wasn't startled to see her cultivation stand at the summit of the divine road. Without warning, the Ant Queen raised her right hand, causing hundreds of tree roots to emerge from the ground and shoot toward Verena. Her sword drew a dazzling arc, releasing a bright golden half-moon that slammed into the incoming roots and have dozens of them. However, as soon as they fell, new ones rose to take their place and carry on the assault onto Verena. Slamming the pommel of her sword against her palm, Verena conjured a golden light shield that contended with the hundreds of incoming tree roots. At first, the shield held its own. However, it didn't take 3 seconds before cracks formed across its surface, and it threatened to collapse under the Ant Queen's casual strike. Ancestral glory, Verena began, but before she could summon her ancestral glory, the Ant Queen's lips parted. Zenith, and instantaneously, Verena found herself suppressed, unable to muster the strength to summon her ancestral glory. Crack! The golden light shield collapsed, enabling the tree roots to carry on unhindered and slam into Verena, who could now only rely on her armor to protect herself. Bang! The tree roots barreled into Verena from all sides, and though her golden armor withstood their impact, her internal organs spiraled out of control while blood gushed from her lips, eyes, and ears. She flew backward, slamming against the barrier she'd raised to cover Yvonne before trailing toward the ground. Too strong, she sighed as she reached the soil. Even with the golden armor, relying on her divine seed cultivation, there was absolutely no way she could contend with that peak divine ascension Ant Queen whose physiques and bloodline all were at the top. But Yvonne still had 6 days to spend within the ancestral blood pool. How could she possibly buy her that amount of time? And to say nothing of her, even the Ant Elders were startled. Although they knew of their queen's formidable strength, knowing was one thing, but seeing, another. Having not seen an Ant Queen in action across thousands of years, they no longer knew what to expect. Surrender to me, offer your armor and the secrets of the Jade Dynasty, and I will not only spare your life but allow you to live in glory, the Ant Queen declared while lowering her hand by her side. Hearing this, Verena's lifted hopeful eyes toward her. For real? Between you and me, there is no need for trickery, she coolly replied without shifting her eyes from Verena. Okay, the battle is hopeless. I'm not so harebrained as to give up my life for that damnable tyrant who robbed my empress seat, and now ogles most of my beloved man's affection. I'm willing to surrender. However, I will only do so on one condition. Verena replied while standing up. And what would that be? The 11th Queen inquired with a smile. That you burn in hell. Seer's vision. Verena snarled and activated her Seer's vision past altering ability. But seeing this, the Ant Queen sneered. Moronic, we've recorded the entirety of your battle. Do you think I don't know of your ability? With your level of soul power and second-layer Seer's vision, even with that armor, you can't shake my fate. She declared in full confidence. And indeed, it appeared Verena's single move caused her enormous backlash. Her eyes went bloodshot while blood erupted from all her orifices, and she dropped on her knees. However, a smile covered her lips. In silence, the 5 Ant Elders unleashed the full might of their cultivation base, physiques, bloodline, and lineage weapons to release their most formidable strikes at the 11th Queen. Although her attention remained locked on Verena, a cultivator of her level was never fully open to sneak attacks. However, never did she expect it would come from the 5 Elders, and as she spun to face them, she could see that within their eyes, massive killing intent shone. The 11th Queen threw a palm strike, sending the 5 Elders spiraling backward and sealing any further motion from them. What the hell did you do to them? She snarled, unable to comprehend the root of the sudden change. It was as if she'd suddenly turned into the 5 Elders' archenemy. Nothing special, just altered their perception of some past events to convince them of a plethora of criminal deeds you carried out against their most loved ones. Now, their highest purpose is to slay you. Hee hee. Verena chuckled while her blood loss carried on, and her heart raced against her chest. The 11th Queen had barely processed the words, that with a new bout of determination, the 5 elders burned their blood and self-destructed, releasing a humongous divine force explosion that hit the 11th queen point-blank and swallowed her whole. Boom! Searing light engulfed the sky, releasing such startling a force that even most peak divine ascension experts couldn't preserve their lives. And as her last bit of energy left her, Verena truly believed the crisis averted. Alas, as the explosion dispersed, the 11th queen still stood within the sky. Except that this time, she appeared with a naked, maimed, and charred body. Rage twisted her face. "Yvonne, I'm sorry. I tried." Verena sighed before collapsing on the ground, in a pool of her own blood. Chapter 332 Callisto and Vilcia. The sight of the Verena half an inch into death, while lying in a pool of her own blood, did nothing to alleviate the fury teeming within the 11th queen's chest. "If I do not rip your body into pieces and feed you to the lowest of beasts, I can never vent this hatred." She roared and aimed her hand toward Verena's bloodied form. Tremendous suction force erupted from her palm to trap Verena's fallen body and lift her into the sky. But as the irresistible force inexorably dragged Verena into the 11th queen's hands, bright golden light erupted from heaven's vault, releasing a dazzling beam that split the connection between the two of them. From that beam, a golden gate appeared and opened to release 2 breathtaking, pale-skinned beauties clad in 4-winged black crystal armors. Without delay, the left one stretched her hand toward Verena, pulling her into her grasp and vanishing to lower her on the ground for emergency treatment. Meanwhile, the remaining beauty's eyes locked on the 11th queen. Blood fiends? She reckoned upon seeing those blood-colored eyes unique to the blood fiends and their demonic creators. But soon, the nature of her foe's lineage became wholly irrelevant. Instead, it was the startling cultivation rippling from her form that took her aback. A Paramount Knight? How can this be? When even the Hidden Forest doesn't possess this level of fiend, how could that Jade Dynasty possibly do so? None of the information they'd gathered on the Jade Dynasty mentioned the presence of high-level fiends. In fact, besides their emperor, the Ant Queen didn't take anyone seriously. After all, although his cultivation had yet to reach the divine rank, his abilities simply were monstrous. Therefore, for the sake of their plans, the Ant Queens temporarily averted direct assaults on the Jade Dynasty, waiting for the completion of their cultivation and the goddess awakening to cleanse the world once and for all. If not for the ancestral blood pool's sensitive origins and strategic importance, they wouldn't have bothered with Verena and Yvonne. Never did the 11th Queen expect that this move would allow them to uncover another hidden layer of the Jade Dynasty's forces. "The might of our Jade Dynasty is not what you can comprehend," the Paramount Knight lady replied with her lips curled into a smile. Thanks to that short exchange, her sister garnered enough time to mend Verena's wounds and pull her out of her critical situation. After laying her against the barrier, she stood up and vanished to reappear by her twin's side. "Callisto and Vilcia of the Infernal Legion. As per His Majesty's will, we sisters have arrived to end your miserable life," they announced in a calm tone that showcased no fear even before the 11th Queen. Faint life essence erupted from her form, closing the wounds caused by the 5 deceased elders. Her eyes contorted into a frown. Though the intensity of the two's auras was incomparably formidable, with that alone, they wouldn't fare any better than Verena did. However, that black crystal armor they wore filled the 11th Queen with apprehension. If they were anything like Verena's golden armor, then this battle was fraught with uncertainty. "Since you're so adamant about courting death, I can only send you on the way," the 11th Queen replied and lifted her hands. This time, thousands of tree roots rose from the ground to barrel into Callisto and Vilcia. Undaunted, they stretched out their hands. Black light erupted from their armors, causing their battle power to skyrocket while 2 black holes appeared before them and sucked all the tree roots in, thereby erasing them from existence. The Ant Queen was startled. Although the might of this armor was a step below Verena, It clearly was endowed with its own set of wondrous abilities. Worse, with their paramount night cultivation and those armor's support, their combined strength would certainly not lose out to hers. Hateful, she cursed, but the two gave her no time to indulge in indignation. In an eruption of red light, blood-colored longswords appeared within their hands. Wielding them, their might again rose, and they shot toward the 11th Queen, whose body bathed in dark green demonic energies. Nihility Flail. Not holding anything back, the 11th Queen summoned her lineage weapon and assumed her true form to charge at her two assailants. Clang, clang, clang. In a succession of ringing, metallic noises, they exchanged hundreds of moves. And it didn't take long before the 11th Queen failed to shoulder the sisters' combined assault. Their infernal armaments broke past her guard, hacking at her thighs, wrists, neck, and causing her dark green blood to erupt. As it rained onto the ground, the Ant Queen endlessly recoiled. Earth Law, she snarled, causing the earth below to soar into the sky, turning into 9 mountains that morphed into an earthen maelstrom before shooting toward the two Night Ladies. Unfazed, they aimed their swords at the sky above. Blood Law, and roared in tandem. Blood-colored clouds gathered, bloating the sky as tidal waves of the same color descended and morphed into legions of blood serpent beasts. Riding the blood sea, the legions of blood serpent beasts slammed into the 11th Queen's Earth Law, obliterating it and sending her spiraling into the hail, disarmed and wide open. Lowering their swords, Callisto and Vilcia aimed them at the tumbling 11th Queen and fired 2 thin blood beams at her, one aiming for her brain and the other for her heart. Rayra. But as fatality approached her, the Ant Queen howled and stretched out her hand, firing a leaf that collided with the blood beams, obliterated them, and carried on unhindered toward Callisto. Another withering leaf. The 11 Queen's heart teemed with rancor and indignation. Although this leaf could solve all her issues, it was a consumable item reserved for critical targets. The Zenith Ants currently possessed less than 20. Never did she expect that when they'd yet to understand why the leaves didn't affect him, she would have to exhaust one on that damnable Jade Emperor's subordinates. But since her life was now at stake, she didn't have a choice. Well aware of the leaf's property, Callisto didn't sit to await damnation. In a breath, she vanished to reappear several miles away. However, as if animated with a will of its own, the leaf pursued, never leaving her tracks. Alarmed, Callisto turned into a blood mist, attempting to use that ethereal shape to avoid the withering leaf. Never did she expect that as the leaf approached, her blood mist form collapsed, and she was forcefully brought back into humanoid form. Odious. No wonder even His Majesty couldn't escape that thing. What am I supposed to do? She wondered in fright. As a paramount knight and legionary, her beauty was secondary. Only her cultivation power mattered. Without it, what purpose did she serve? Resistance is futile. Once a withering leaf locks on you, even if you run to the end of the ancient crystal world, it won't let you off. The 11th Queen bellowed while summoning her lineage weapon back in her hand. And hearing the derisive words, Callisto chose an extreme road. That being the case, let's go beyond. And flew out of the ancient crystal world. The 11th Queen's eyes widened in disbelief. She left? And just like Callisto gambled, by the time the withering leaf reached the ancient crystal world's exosphere, it stopped, neither advancing nor retreating. It was as if it was telling her, as long as you return, I won't spare you. Thus, though Callisto managed to avoid the fate of sealed cultivation, she couldn't return to the ancient crystal world either. Aware of her new reality, she summoned the Sun Shooter, and from above the exosphere, aimed the bow at the 11th Queen. Down below, Vilcia summoned the Imperial Jade Seal, and in perfect sync, the twin sisters unleashed lethal strikes at the 11th Queen. A dazzling, flaming arrow descended from the sky, blowing her head into smithereens while the Imperial Jade Seal tore through her body. Hence, her body perished, But as her soul attempted to flee to safety, jade light erupted from the seal, trapping it where it stood while another flaming arrow descended upon her. How could I possibly perish at the hands of such base and low worms? Those were the 11th Queen's last words before her soul burned into nothingness. And with her death, the withering leaf tumbled and dropped back onto the ground. Knowing that victory wouldn't be snatched depending on their strength alone, they fled back into the barrier and triggered their defensive formations. Dozens of blood pillars rose from the ground, forming a massive blood dome around them all, and repelling the incoming vines without a hitch. Conrad's Imperial Jade Seal and Sun Shooter appeared in the formation's eye, serving as its energy core and power supply. Controlled by Vilcia and Callisto, 100 meters-long blood-red bow appeared before the dome and fired dozens of arrows at the 3 ant queens. Useless, the 12th queen scoffed, and before the arrows could reach them, they crumbled under the protective halo of their life essence. In an air whistle, the 3 queens vanished, reappeared before the dome, and simultaneously punched. Empowered by life essence, their fists crashed against the dome, sending another berserk shockwave throughout its walls. Still, the dome endured. The ant queen's eyes contorted into frowns, and again they punched, releasing a flurry of blows that echoed throughout the hidden forest. Boom, boom, boom. Unable to counterattack, Vilcia and Callisto focused on defense, putting the full might of their cultivation into nourishing the artifacts, which in turn empowered the formation, allowing it to shoulder the 3 queens' brutal assault. Their relentless battering carried on throughout an entire day, but as if their energy knew no limits, they carried on. However, the Blood Dome stood firm, refusing to collapse under their oppression and keeping Conrad's consorts safe through the effort of his top legionaries. Another day flew by, and still, the dome endured. However, Callisto and Vilcia were starting to show signs of faltering. How can they just keep punching and punching at full strength? Do they possess limitless energy reserves? The sisters wondered while sweat trickled down their foreheads. And indeed, although cultivators and mortals were not of the same mold, if there was one thing they had in common, it was limited energy. Of course, what a cultivator saw as limited, to a mortal was akin to endless. However, to repeatedly release full power blows across several days was an inconceivable matter. Until now, Conrad was the only one Callisto and Vilcia saw capable of doing so. But to achieve that, he relied on his unparalleled bloodline. But now, it seemed that those ant queens could achieve the same thing with their life essence alone. It shouldn't take much longer, right? They consoled themselves as their arms quivered. But in truth, even if they managed to endure the remaining days and give Yvonne enough time to complete whatever she was doing in that blood pool, they didn't believe her return would trigger any change in this situation. At best, they could rely on the harem gate to flee this place and return to Conrad's side. Boom, boom, boom. 3 days passed in succession, the 3 longest and most torturous days the sisters had experienced in their lifetimes. But still, they endured, relying on restorative pills to replenish their energies and maintain the blockade. However, at the dawn of the 7th, crack, 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 they faltered, and cracks started spreading throughout the blood dome, marking the beginning of the end for them all. At that time, Verena awoke. However, due to the backlash she suffered, she couldn't rise to provide them with assistance, only being able to lie helpless before the inevitable. Damnable, they cursed in sync. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.